situation, unable to hide the joy on his face. Excellent. With this momentum, we can hold on for another week. Within that week, reinforcements will reach the other cities too. Suddenly, he noticed someone opening the city gate. He yelled in a panic, "Who opened the gate?" A soldier immediately answered, "It's a knight from the 3rd Knightly Order, sir." As the gate swung open, a group prepared to march out. It was the Knightly Order, a collection of useless nobles. A particularly overconfident blonde-haired man saw this as his chance to shine. From the wall, the general urgently ordered his men to close the city gate. Seeing them hesitate, he screamed even louder, "Close the gate right now! Close the city gate immediately!" Left with no choice, the guards scrambled to pull the chains, but suddenly an enemy arrow took down a guard, causing the gate to swing wide open. At this sight, the general fell into despair once more. This time it's really over for humanity. Suddenly, someone shouted for him to look at the sky. Hearing this, his gaze shot upward. At this critical moment, high panic, riding a giant dragon, descended upon the battlefield. He held a sword in his hand and declared loudly, "Everyone, you can all rest easy now." As he leapt down, he announced, "For I, Exugan, Cantin have arrived." Meanwhile, the king was extremely troubled by the situation. He was listening to the general's report on how High Panic had just routed the Demon King's army. Hearing this, everyone else was overjoyed and sang his praises, but the king felt deeply worried about letting him fight the Demon King's soldiers alone. The general then added that the dragon the prince was riding had incinerated the entire Demon King's army. At these words, the king was astonished that his son could actually summon a dragon. The general, with a beaming face, assured him it was all true. Yet the king still seemed to find the story absurd, even though there were many witnesses. The king appeared lost in thought as he glanced at the others in the room. Everyone was still profusely praising High Panic, hailing him as the hero of humanity. The king thought to himself, if I keep refusing to acknowledge the boy's achievements, they'll start to suspect me. After a moment's hesitation, he finally spoke, up to acknowledge the boy's contribution, then fell silent. No one noticed the incredibly fierce look that flashed in his eyes. Hero of humanity! Never. He and I are cut from the same cloth. His mind raced with questions. Did he really land the final blow in the battle with the Demon King? It might be true. He really is that talented and capable. Then he wondered, or did the hero and the saintess die fighting the Demon King? He quickly dismissed the thought. Impossible. The Demon King wasn't the one who turned the hero and saintess to gold. The prince did that after the battle was over. The king clenched his fist. In any case, the plan for the hero to return as the crown prince has failed. If he really did that, then going through with the plan to kill the prince wouldn't be strange at all. In fact, that would actually make more sense. Suddenly, the king paused for a moment. But one thing didn't add up. How could he pull something like that off without facing divine punishment? The royal family's authority is a reward from the goddess for their dedication, loyalty, and faith. For a member of the royal family, a prince to become a hero is an unforgivable sin, yet there was no sign that the prince had been divinely punished. Quite the opposite, he was being praised for contributing more to the world than any hero before him. Therefore, the clerics who once backed the princess were now siding with the prince. No matter how you sliced it, the whole situation was unbelievable. He sighed and thought to himself, I have to admit it, the prince has changed. All the rumors are true. After a moment of thought, he realized he might have been too prejudiced. Perhaps it was time to reconsider his views. Meanwhile, H-Panic had returned to Jiancanton and annihilated the remnants of the Demon King's army. The sight of the great dragon soaring majestically across the blue sky left a powerful impression on everyone. Nobles who once despised him were now calling him a hero. A few days later, in Santo Aus, an army was approaching from the distance. The one leading them was H-Panic. People packed both sides of the road, shouting to welcome him home. Everyone cheerfully waved and called out to the prince. He walked proudly amidst the cheers of the crowd. A smirk played on his lips. I'm back, you old coot. At that time in the palace, everyone was bustling about preparing a banquet, and everyone was busy with their respective duties. Observing the scene, he remarked dryly to a person in a guard's uniform beside him. Looks like everyone's busy, except for us. Then he turned and added, It seems the old man is pretty wary of you. Hearing that the man just replied, I couldn't care less. More importantly, are you positive about this plan? Noticing his companion's lingering doubt, H-Panic reassured him. Of course, this information comes directly from the goddess, but now is not the time for us to make our move, right? In response, Kim calmly replied, I know. As the man walked away, H-Panic added, I'm counting on you. Just then, a bell chimed, drawing everyone's attention to the doors. With purpose in his stride, H-Panic began to walk forward, making his grand entrance. It was clear they were welcoming him with all the pomp and circumstance of a royal ceremony. They hailed him as the foremost warrior of the Order of the Holy Sword, wielder of the Wand of Light, and heir to the 7th Crown Prince, Edward Jiancanton. The king's emotions were a tangled mess. In stark contrast to him, a confident smile was plastered on H-Panic's face. A clear smile. The king felt a knot of anxiety, wondering if allowing him inside had been a terrible mistake. Immediately after, a royal guard approached and requested, "Your Highness, would you please place your sword here?" "Shush!" The guard remembered the king's orders. If the prince so much as draws his sword, kill him on the spot. H, panic, kept his hand on his sword, making no move to surrender it. One could see the tension between the three of them was thick enough to cut with a knife, but then he suddenly relinquished his sword, placing it on the offered tray, and knelt to pay his respects. He and the king exchanged a few pleasantries, with the prince playing the role of a perfectly dutiful son. After a moment, the king asked, "Did you learn anything on your journey?" Hearing this, he replied, "I did, father. I've come to realize just how much you've sacrificed for our people and what a heavy burden that crown you wear truly is." As soon as he finished speaking, Aid Panic rose to his feet, much to the king's surprise. The king bellowed, "Who gave you permission to stand our inward smarper, sanad smas and trar?" Oh, H. Panic's power flared as he replied gravely, "I also know what must be done." As he spoke, the sword on the guard's tray vanished into thin air, only to reappear in his own hand a moment later. A cold light flashed in H. Panic's eyes. "From this day forward, father, you will no longer need to make sacrifices, nor will you have to bear the weight of this crown." At these treasonous words, the terrified king stammered, asking what he meant to do. H. Panic, while drawing his sword, said coolly, "I am simply inheriting the throne, father." The king, frozen on his throne, was utterly stunned by his son's audacity. His face was a mask of fear as he screamed, "How audacious! How dare you!" The soldiers, seeing the prince armed, immediately surrounded him. H. Panic scanned the room. A soldier's eyes widened as he recognized the sword he was holding and said, "The sword of light." Then his gaze shifted to the armor he was wearing, the armor of light, and finally to the shield that he wore on one shoulder. The shield of light. Seeing the full set of holy equipment, that soldier pleaded, "Your Highness, what are you doing?" Please stop this at once." But the prince's expression hardened. He raised his hand toward the soldiers, his hand gripping his sword tightly. In a single fluid motion, he cut down two of the nearest soldiers. The king, watching in horror, yelled, "That's right, to think I actually thought. You had changed. How foolish I was. A leopard never changes its spots." However, a cruel sneer then crossed his face as he thought to himself, "This is just as I predicted." The king gripped the armrest of his throne, his mind racing. "I've already positioned the assassins." His trump card was ready. He sat silently on the throne, observing the situation. The king tapped his fingers on the armrest again and again, giving the signal. But nothing happened. No one appeared. Seeing this, he asked in confusion, "What's going on? Why hasn't anyone appeared yet?" The king frantically looked at the nobles and royals beside him, ordering, "What are you all standing there for? The prince has committed treason. Call the soldiers." But they didn't respond to his words, only offered strange smiles. Seeing this, the king was both frightened and confused. "What is happening?" Flashing back to the past, there was a monster that looked like a single-eyed octopus, right in the center. Of all the creatures I had ever eaten, the pozolot and rot was the strangest, with the most bizarre biological traits. Everyone who laid eyes on it would fall into a daze. It was a parasite that could survive without a host, and it was a colony of several individuals merged to form one single consciousness. A man flashed a grotesque smile. Even the individuals that were separated could move according to the will of the entire collective. Of course, with the unique nature of my powers, right from the start, many monsters panicked and fled just from seeing a monster with bat wings. But in the port town, I devoured countless goblins from the demon tribe. After my power increased, I started to develop a parasitic ability. The parasitic organisms could move through space. Although it was imperfect, it could still make the separated individuals move. While I couldn't control the host, I could influence its emotions or erase its memories. After discovering this truth, the prince took advantage of it and concocted a plan. Hyponic glanced at the man in armor and said, "Brainwash them." The armored man standing beside him spoke up. "That's beside the point, but we have to accept such conspicuous things." Hearing this, he calmly replied, "You don't need to worry about that, brother. We won't be doing anything nearly as complicated as brainwashing." It was as if he had two personalities now. One side was normal, while the other wore a sinister smile and said, "Stimulate the frontal lobe to increase empathy. The target is me. That way, every time they see me achieving what I want, they will experience the maximum vicarious satisfaction." After receiving the order, the armored man immediately went to carry it out. Infecting the people in the royal palace wasn't difficult. All it took was dropping the eggs into the well used for their drinking water. That was the method he used. He had been a great help to me. Returning to the present, Hyponic has killed all the soldiers. Standing in the middle of the blood-red room, he walks step by step towards the king. As he does, he speaks of the Queen Mother's death. His feet step into the pools of blood on the floor, each step leaving a bloody footprint on the carpet. He continues, "Sending assassins to kill. On me, sending anger to the theocracy." The king, sitting on his throne, looks terrified as he listens. "There are so many things I want to ask you, but that's enough for now." His face filled with killing intent as he points his sword at the king. Die, he thrusts the sword deep into his own father. The man can only scream in pain. You monster. The sword pierces straight through the king, causing him to collapse as blood spurts from his mouth. The king uses his last ounce of strength to say, Edward. His hand trembles as he grips the blade, looking at his attacker and saying, I truly hope a special place in hell is reserved. For you, you traitor's son. He yanks his sword out, replying, Then I'll see you there. Farewell, old man. The king then collapses onto the floor, his crown clattering away. He bends down and picks up the red cape. Hyponic lifts the cape and drapes it over his own shoulders. He stands with a solemn expression in the middle of the room. A dark figure then jumps down behind him. When he turns back, he sees an assassin dressed in black. The assassin is on the ground crying out in pain, Ugh, who the hell are you? Another knight leaps down from above and finishes him off. His task complete, the knight coldly states, It's done. Hyponic, picking up the crown, says, Excellent. One way or another, I have eliminated all the useless ones. He takes the bloodstained crown and places it on his own head, then sits upon the throne and declares, From now on, no one can stand in my way. A person below begins to applaud, and then the others join in unison. Applause echoes throughout the room. He sits on the blood-soaked throne looking down. That evening, he remains in the same spot, his face in shadow, as he whispers to someone, Yes, I know, brother. A figure seems to appear in the room. His voice continues, I already know what you wanted to say. His eyes now hold a look of sadness. The only thing I ever wished for from the goddess was simply knowledge. He recalls the man in armor. I used it to let Kim know where the targets for elimination were. He then thinks of his brother. Among that knowledge were also the words you wanted to leave behind before you passed. Remembering this, he trembles with rage and says, You told me not to cross the line, didn't you? In a situation like that, without a single word of resentment, you said that. That's just like you, brother. He stands up and shouts, But it's too late. It's too late, brother. Hyponic admonishes the figure standing in the middle of the room who now speaks. What's the use of that now? You should have told me before I joined forces with that monster. He holds a small ball of light in his palm, telling the figure to disappear. From now on, this world will change. It will become a world not much different from the one you knew. He shines the ball of light at the figure before him, causing the other's body. By splitting him in two, he made the light boss vanish. That means no one will be able to cling to that empty title of humanity's champion anymore. With the demon clan, our common enemy, gone, humanity will now have to face the enemies within its own ranks. He thought for a moment, before continuing, And it's thanks to the power of monsters that I've gotten this far, so I intend to repay them as well. If I want to get back to Earth, there's the Elf King, the Dwarf King, the Merfolk King, the Divine Race King. His voice echoed in the darkness. I will offer the heads of the kings from the various races on the altar sealed in the basement of the Holy Nations Cathedral. To do that, an era of widespread war will be necessary, Kim noted. Just as he narrated, the prince overthrew the incompetent king and took the throne, ensuring the kingdom would prosper for a very long time. The gourmet's adventure in a strange land. End of part 1. Kim closed his notebook. H-Pack, who was sitting nearby, spoke up. I have a question. Hearing this, Kim replied, Go ahead. HPIC rested his chin on his hand, looked at him with concern, and asked, So what exactly is that book? The Gourmet's Adventure in a Strange Land. Kim glanced over at him and said, I've told you before. When I get back to Earth, I'm going to take out my old comrades, shed my former identity, and live as someone new. He slammed the book on the table and added, If I do that, it'll be tough to maintain my current income, so I've decided to write a book to sell. The book is the story of my journey eating all sorts of things in another world, which is why it's called The Gourmet's Adventure in a Strange Land. Hearing this, HEPX chuckled. A title like that probably won't sell very well. You should try something a little more dynamic. If you're the main character, he said, picturing it, how about calling it Getting Stronger by Eating? Kim simply replied from his seat, The title doesn't matter. In any case, I'm planning to have a ghostwriter handle it for me. I'm great at eating, but I'm a terrible writer. HPIC then asked, What if it doesn't sell? Kim smirked and explained, That's impossible. It's based on my own blood, sweat, and tears. Of course, it'll be fictionalized a bit. Who knows, it might sell 1 million copies and even get adapted into a world-famous 3-part fantasy film trilogy. At this, HPIC shook his head with a helpless sigh. After a moment, he spoke up again. I get your point, but that's all for after you return to Earth, isn't it? So let's discuss how you're actually going to get back to Earth. First, the condition for your return that the goddess mentioned is, before HPIC could finish, Kim cut in, to kill all the kings leading the different races, and then use their heads as an offering rite. The real question is whether that's even possible. HPC glanced at a stack of papers in his desk drawer and replied, Right now, it's impossible. He pulled out the stack of papers, straightened them, and continued, This is a completely different situation from taking down the Demon King. While we could use a small elite force to assassinate a king, he analyzed, picturing their armies. Their successor would just take the throne, use humanity's arrogance as an excuse, and form an alliance with the other races to attack us. HPC considered the elves and continued, The elves are masters of both archery and magic. Then he thought of the dwarves' smithing abilities. The dwarves' metalworking skills are so advanced, they're practically magic. He then brought up another race, continuing, and the physical prowess of the beastmen and the divine race has long since surpassed that of humans. He then highlighted their main disadvantage. Even though humanity has a larger population, the other races all possess unique abilities, so we wouldn't stand a chance. If they were to join forces, we're the ones who would be wiped out. Ishbaek stood up and concluded, "For now we have to focus on building up our internal strength." He walked toward Kim, explaining, "We need to centralize our power and form alliances with the other human kingdoms. Only then can we wage war against the kingdoms of the other races." He placed a stack of papers on the table, much to Kim's surprise. "So this is the first step?" Kim asked, picking up a few sheets of paper to read. He murmured, "So it is." The papers contained profiles and photos of several people. His voice was sharp as he asked, "A kill list?" As realization dawned, his expression darkened. He glared at H-Beck and growled, "Are you giving me orders?" HPC calmly sat down in the chair across from him. "No, it's just a suggestion. Turn to the next page." Hearing this, Kim quickly complied. A look of sheer astonishment spread across his face. The paper listed various pieces of information. Griffin flock habitat. Zenport collapse due to an invasion. Report on a manticore discovery. He continued to mumble the information from the paper. Main wyvern nesting ground, Lake Ben, Blue Dragon Mountain. What is all this? His face lit up with excitement as he asked, "Is this a treasure map?" Seeing Kim's reaction, H-Pick replied happily, "Seeing you this pleased makes me happy too." H-Pick fished something out of his pocket and continued, "Excellent. In that case, Sir Kim," he took out a badge and held it up in front of him. "By the authority of the heir to the throne, I hereby appoint you as a secret royal inspector." Hearing the title, Kim asked in confusion, "This kingdom has that position too." Seeing his skeptical look, H-Vax quickly explained, "Well, I just created it. We originally had guardian knights. That's not an issue. A shadow agent has more freedom than a guardian knight, but that doesn't mean you can just abandon your post. Your loyalty is always to the one in power." Kim seemed to have anticipated this, replying softly, "Just as I thought." In his heart he mused, "I get a treasure map and the freedom to operate without anyone looking over my shoulder. In return, I take care of the prince's enemies. Sounds like a fair trade." With that, he took the emblem and said, "You have a deal." Kim stood up. "Well, I'll be on my way then." With his usual carefree expression, the prince advised, "Oh, and Atam, my coronation is next year. Make sure you come back for it. We can't have rumors spreading that the two heroes who defeated the Demon King are fighting." As he walked out, Kim replied, "Don't you worry." Once he was outside, Kim started to wonder, "All right then, which path should I take? Where should I go, and how should I travel?" He glanced down, his thoughts swirling. What's my first move, and what can I skip for now? He clutched the documents tightly in his hand, thinking, I need to figure out the most effective way to use this information. Kim started walking, but his mind kept racing. He knew that after this journey, he would be significantly stronger. Meanwhile, back in the room, High Panic was still sitting in the same spot when a voice called down from above, "Your Highness, are you?" "All right." Hearing the voice, he asked, "Why do you ask?" A figure dressed in black concealed in the rafters spoke to him. "Sir Kim is an incredibly powerful warrior. I believe letting him leave your side could compromise your safety." Panic gently chided his subordinate. "Nonsense. That's precisely why I have all of you here, isn't it?" Hearing this, the person in the rafters replied, "My apologies." The prince yawned and continued, "If you're truly sorry, then prove it with your strength and your results." The man in black heard this and replied, "As you wish, Captain of the Assassin Squad." The captain of the Royal Assassin Squad, a secret organization of assassins. Why would Prince Sword, the man who killed the previous king, keep such assassins under his command? A flashback shows the king. Originally, King Edward IV had intended to give control of the Royal Assassin Squad to Edward. The plan was for the first prince to ascend the throne, bringing glory to the royal family. The second prince, serving as both Left Chancellor and leader of the Assassin Squad, was meant to eliminate the family's enemies from the shadows. However, the first prince was raised to be too kind and became a hero instead, causing the second prince's entire plan to unravel. An image of the Assassin Squad appears. In any case, that plan was already in motion. They would be given specific missions to demonstrate their loyalty to the king and Prince Edward, which would effectively brainwash them. The ring used to control the Assassin Squad is shown on someone's finger. The condition was simple. Prince Edward would inherit everything the king possessed. And what the king truly wanted to pass on to the prince was the ring that symbolized leadership over the Royal Assassin Squad. We see another image of the prince picking up the crown. He had seized power from the late king. Regardless, the prince had taken everything he owned. An image shows him sitting on the throne after killing his father. And so the Royal Assassin Squad was passed down to its new master. The prince now controlled one of the two military organizations with the freedom to move in and out of the kingdom. An image of the Royal Knight Order appears, and the other armed force, the Royal Guard, was also completely obedient to the prince, thanks to being infected with a brainwashing parasite. He sat on his throne, thinking smugly, if that monster leaves the royal palace, the parasite's control will vanish. In the meantime, I have to make them completely mine. A smirk spread across his face as he thought, what binds people together are benefits and satisfaction, and also guilt. So, shall we give it a try? Kim recalled the armor he was given and thought, the armor I received from him is very useful, but wearing it daily would draw way too much attention. Even the title, the Prince's Guardian Knight, is a hassle. For someone as famous as me, he blended into the shadows, thinking, it's not suited for the role of a shadow agent who needs to act freely. He looked at the newly forged armor, thinking, that's why I ordered a new set of armor. It's not flashy, but it's still magical, and most importantly, it's perfect for posing as a mercenary or an adventurer. He examined the armor and said to himself, they made this in just 2 days, so this is what power feels like. People with status and authority really have it made. He fastened his sword to his waist and continued, but all this political stuff has nothing to do with me. The sky above was a clear blue. He walked out of the city gate saying, from now on, I'm going to spend my time on adventures, not on politics anymore. Kim paused, lost in thought. Right now, I'm the hero who fought the Demon King and also a man the prince values, but the harsh reality is back on Earth, I was nothing more than an internationally wanted criminal. In other words, Kim was a fugitive, hunted by police agencies, intelligence organizations, and even crime syndicates, plain and simple. To keep from being found by these powerful groups, he wasn't allowed to do the things he loved. For starters, he wasn't allowed to play sports. The reason for this was because any information regarding his contact with people, any other hobby might have exposed him. Besides, he couldn't just quit gaming. His passion for it was simply too strong. After his second and third identities were compromised, Kim knew that reading was his safest option. He enjoyed novels the most, but since series were a pain to carry around, he preferred standalone books because his other pastimes were too risky for his identity, so he had reluctantly taken up reading as a hobby. However, he eventually grew to genuinely love it. Unfortunately, the civilization and culture in this world were not as advanced as they were on Earth. Books were a luxury, typically owned only by the nobility. Of course, the books he could read were all thanks to the prince, though it wasn't. Quite a dire situation compared to the books from Earth. The ones here were incredibly dull. Even though no one was writing any interesting stories, this place, in contrast, had fascinating tales passed down orally. Before the written word, humanity passed its collective knowledge to its descendants through speech and song, and that was precisely the treasure trove containing the wisdom of generations. A woman stood on a high platform and declared, these are the old stories that parents tell their children, the songs that village elders teach the next generation. She smiled radiantly, confirming that someone had finally stepped up to preserve these stories from being forgotten. In closing, she emphasized that if you want to become the main character of a story, go to the School of Poets. Then you will become that hero. These inspiring words of hers seemed to resonate with an aspiring singer, Felina Jin Smith. She endeavored to become a minstrel only to realize how foolish she'd been to believe such smooth words. The reason she came here was simply that she wanted to hear dramatic tales that glorified people. She wasn't interested in stories about small-time adventuring parties with their local heroes. To her, a minstrel was ultimately just a street performer who sang dramatic stories to entertain people. After spending some time here, Felina also came to the full realization that the kind of minstrel she wanted to be had nothing to do with this. In the central district of Lord Faber Santo's territory, Felina was stepping into a tavern. She moved carefully, taking slow, quiet steps. Her eyes slowly swept across the room, taking in the brothers in arms who were gathered, eating, drinking, and laughing boisterously. She guessed they were a small team of mercenaries. When she walked past Kim, she had a strong feeling that he was an adventurer. Felina looked further into the room, her gaze landing on a person with a completely covered face, sitting with several jars of wine, brooding by himself. On the surface, he looked like just another drunk, but she trusted her instincts. She could keenly see that he was wearing very fine armor, which meant this person had an extraordinary background. Besides, getting involved with him on purpose wouldn't benefit her in any way. The girl returned to her spot, playing her instrument as she mulled things over. Mercenaries fight. People, while adventurers, fight monsters, so they generally leave each other alone. She also decided against telling stories about the mercenaries' war with heroes or the adventurers' life and death battle with a hydra. This was because Felina worried that if she sang it the wrong way and caused a fight, she wouldn't be able to earn any coin. Luckily, she had a secret trump card. Just thinking about it got her excited, and she shouted loudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, the song is about to begin. This is the ballad of the prince who defeated the Demon King and the dragon's summoning knight." A young, weary mercenary looked up in stunned surprise. The young blonde-haired man also seemed to faintly recognize the tale. In the silent room, the clear sound of a lute suddenly rang out. Felina swept up, and the classic melody began to sing with a voice that soared and fell with the music. The group of mercenaries became even more convinced that she was in the know. The blonde young man smiled brightly. "This is a story everyone knows." Gold. Coins were continuously tossed into the green hat she had set on the ground. This was exactly what Felina had hoped for. So she became even more certain that this song was a real winner. In her heart, though, she suddenly felt a pang of despair. Although everyone's reaction was fantastic, how many more days would she have to sing this? It was getting nauseating. However, Felina quickly composed herself, because the most important part was coming up, and today's income hinged on it. It was so important because the death of the hero who was once his brother in arms, caused the prince heart-wrenching pain and filled him with rage toward the vile demon king. That emotion reached the goddess, and the prince was temporarily granted the hero's power. That was the moment the prince's sword pierced the demon king's heart. Just as she was about to reach the decisive part, that mercenary shouted, "That bastard!" He angrily grabbed Kim's collar, questioning, "How dare you laugh the prince's story? He's a true traitor, and you're just sitting there laughing your head off." His comrades could only feel sorry for Kim. Their friend always got a short temper when he drank. Felina's jaw dropped in horror as her source of income was cut off. Confused, she wondered, what is this all about? Mercenaries versus an adventurer. A 1-against-4 fight. From a quick glance, she guessed the mercenaries would definitely win this round. Next time she'd sing about the mercenaries' battle with the hero. The very thought made her smile. She was sure they would love it and open their wallets, showering her with tips. But then something unexpected happened. The bald guy's arm was suddenly grabbed tight. He just stood there, stunned and confused, when a sudden pain shot up his wrist, making him scream in agony. But it didn't stop there. Despite his pained roars, Kim didn't let up reaching out and grabbing his face, before mercilessly slamming him face first onto the floor. The whole group of his buddies sitting nearby were stunned by the scene. They aggressively rushed forward to see what kind of crazy stunt Kim was trying to pull, planning to teach him a lesson in the process. However, just as one of them opened his mouth, Kim punched him. He went flying backward before he could even react, crashing into the corner of a table. The blondie also rushed in to help, pulling out his weapon to finish Kim off, but just as he pressed it to Kim's neck, it suddenly shattered into 100 tiny pieces. Kim just looked at him and gave a vicious smile, and it seemed this guy's number was up. After that, all you could hear were the desperate screams of the mercenaries. Felina couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing her instrument and her hat, she bolted. Inside the pub, the pained, desperate screams continued to echo. The girl hurried through the streets. She had a bad feeling that things were about to get seriously out of hand. That's why she needed to get out of there fast before they turned on her. And that was a much smarter move than any of the other residents in Santo made. Hearing the story made Kim laugh out loud. The prince was granted the power of the hero that bastard is suffering. That's hilarious. It had been a long time since he'd heard such a good joke, and yet these guys had the nerve to interrupt. This made him even angrier. He tightened his grip on their necks, making them tremble, and begged for their lives. Just then, a figure slowly approached from a distance, calling out to him. This person walked step by step, and although she didn't know what was going on, seeing Kim brutally beating someone made her unable to just stand by and watch him bully the weak. As she spoke, she pulled down her hood. The girl boldly declared that as a noble holy knight, she would absolutely not forgive Kim. Hearing John Henn's bold declaration of her status, Kim glanced over at her. His eyes suddenly narrowed with caution when he learned she was a holy knight. Kim gave her a quick once-over, deep in thought. Although he couldn't see it clearly, that emblem definitely belonged to the papal state of the goddess's religion, and the holy knights were one of the papal state's asymmetric warfare units. Among the intel the prince provided, there had to be something about the papal state. The papal state was basically another version of the Vatican on Earth. However, most of its people were incredibly superhuman. The papal state's most formidable asymmetric asset was the Holy Maiden, who had accompanied him in a previous battle. A skeleton fused with enchanted metal, rippling muscles, and superior vision and reflexes, far beyond those of a normal human. You could call them living weapons, but creating a Holy Maiden required a lot of time and money. Even if the entire world chipped in to support the papal state, it would still take 10 years to create a single Holy Maiden. To create a weapon as powerful as a hero with human hands required such a great sacrifice. Because of this, the papal state used a more efficient method for creating superhumans, the Holy Knights. A Holy Knight, just like a Holy Maiden, is an artificial human created through magic and blessings. However, the cost to produce a Holy Knight was only 1/200th. That of a Holy Maiden, and their operational lifespan was only 2/5 as long. Once the system was established, they could produce about 10 Holy Knights at a time. Of course, their capabilities weren't on par with a Holy Maiden. If a Holy Maiden was a state-of-the-art tank, then a Holy Knight was just a common, older model tank. Still, whether it was a new tank or an old one, a normal human couldn't possibly defeat it. Kim was still choking the mercenary with no intention of letting go. He knew that Holy Knights were actually weaker than heroes or Holy Maidens. With a few tweaks, he could easily destroy them. Still, Kim figured it wouldn't be good to make enemies of them right off the bat, so he let the man go. After being released, the guy immediately took off running for his life. Without a single glance back, Kim glanced at her indifferently and reluctantly asked, "Is that good enough?" He saw her standing there, awkwardly scratching her head, which made Kim a bit confused. It turned out the reason Zion Hen was so shocked was because he had let the guy go so easily. Usually, bullies who preyed on the weak didn't back down so readily at her command. Seeing that she seemed to have misunderstood, he had no choice but to explain that they were the ones who started the trouble and threatened him, and he was just defending himself. Understanding what really happened She scratched her head in embarrassment, realizing she had messed up. Kim dusted off his shoulders in annoyance, looking disappointed. What a boring comedy. Unbearable. Not even worth paying to watch. Dion Hen's face, which was already red, turned bright red as she stammered completely. Mortified, she had to grit her teeth and pull her hood back on tightly. Then she quickly scurried to the end of the row and sat down, huddled over in the corner, and ordered another round. She was a complete mess, shaking like a leaf, and just muttering to herself. Seeing this, Kim also turned to leave. He figured he'd done more than enough. Besides, it was almost time for his meeting. The Pharaoh's territory was one of the few places that didn't suffer much damage during the Demon King's massive offensive, mostly because it had no strategic or tactical value. Back then, the Demon King's army focused on hitting key human strongholds, completely paralyzing them. Technology went backward and production plummeted. The territory was also sparsely populated, so it couldn't become a threat to the Demon King's army. However, everything changed after the war. People from the surrounding areas that had been heavily damaged flocked here looking for work. Surviving mercenaries came to this place to rest. Due to the high-demand restaurants, and inns popped up everywhere, helping the Faraz territory reach an unprecedented golden age. But that prosperity also brought some negative consequences. With so many outsiders flooding in, a very strange class system emerged. The lowest class consisted of the refugees. The middle class was made up of the original residents of the Pharaoh's territory, and at the top were the mercenaries. The biggest problem was these very mercenaries. These mercs were the de facto ruling class of the territory. They were entrusted with power because they knew full well they were the reason for this era of prosperity, so they used their money and their fists to solve everything. So what about the public authorities meant to stop their tyranny? They were non-existent. Faraz was just a place for them to make a profit. They didn't care about law and order. Kim leaned against a wall, getting a rundown from the royal assassin. He was reporting on the entire situation, giving Kim a solid grasp of the basics. Once his briefing was done, the assassin quickly asked when Kim planned to act. Not wanting to delay, Kim replied bluntly, "Right now." Hearing that, the assassin immediately suggested 30 minutes later, and they both agreed. Before leaving, Kim didn't forget to remind him that when the time came, he would send a signal. Just as Kim stepped out of the alley, a deafening noise erupted, drawing his attention. A huge axe-wielding man yelled, asking him who the hell he was. With him was the same guy Kim had just given a memorable beatdown to, along with other goons standing aggressively behind him. He was furiously questioning Kim, demanding to know why he dared to touch a member of the Red Wind Mercenary Guild. The guy who was beaten earlier, feeling brave with his backup, also started running his mouth. "You bastard, where did you crawl out from?" Only then did Kim really get a look at this guy who was itching for another beating. Kim finally remembered he was the one who caused trouble with him back in the pub. Having a rough idea of what was happening, he quickly slipped back into the alley. He shot them a fierce look and thought to himself that he'd have to speed up the plan. The leader, at this point, was also just staring blankly, lost in thought as he really didn't want to get involved in this mess. But one of his underlings had been beaten to a pulp by Kim, so if he ignored it, he would lose face. But if Kim could survive a 4-on-1 fight, then he was clearly dangerous. He looked over at his constantly provoking underling and couldn't help but feel weary. In his mind, he had originally planned to just scare Kim enough that he wouldn't dare make a peep. He'd call him a punk, then they'd all go for a drink, and that would be the end of it. Finally, he'd just shout once to wrap things up. With that thought, he impatiently decided to get on with his plan. However, he had just shouted for Kim to come out, not even having time to threaten or warn him when someone scolded him for being so noisy. Hearing that his face suddenly darkened, he stared blankly at the person slowly approaching him. Count Faraz came forward and reminded them, "This is Santo Febo, my domain, not a place for you thugs to wreak havoc." After getting a clear look at the man, the leader breathed a sigh of relief, seeing that he was just some drunk. Suddenly an idea flashed in his mind. He would make an example out of the Count to show Kim to back off, and so he ordered his underlings to attack. They obeyed and immediately charged forward at their leader's command. They closed in on the Count and sneered, thinking they would shut him up for good. But not only was the Count not scared, he even laughed out loud. An arrow flew from nowhere and lodged itself right in his chest, causing him to stagger, lose his balance, and fall backward. The leader was stunned. His face turned pale with fear as he asked his idiotic underlings which one of them dared to take a man's life, but it was too late. The surrounding townspeople started screaming, "The mercenaries are murdering people. They're trying to take over Santo Febo." People started shouting, urging each other to rise up and not let them wreak havoc anymore. They yelled, "Take back Santo Febo," and aggressively charged toward them. At this point, the leader could only tremble and silently pray, "I'm so screwed." Then Count Faraz sat right back up, a smug smile on his lips. According to the assessment of Prince Hyde Panic, the rightful heir to the throne and the next king of the great Gajan Canteen Kingdom, Count Faraz was an incurable psychopath. Previously, during his father's reign, for them, that place was once the leading territory of an entire kingdom, but after just 2 generations of descendants, it had become chaotic and impoverished. Because his parents died early, he had to become the lord at a young age, but it seems he was a definite late bloomer. Even at 50 years old, his abilities and his mind were still like those of a stumbling 12-year-old. Spitz glanced over Febo's file, confirming that the man hadn't accomplished a single thing in decades. All he'd done was get older. A truly hopeless case. He resolved to erase Count Febo from the history books. At first, Kim figured the prince was just exaggerating since he'd said it while drunk. However, upon arriving in the territory and seeing it with his own eyes, he realized the prince hadn't been exaggerating one bit. He was shocked to see just how desolate the territory truly was. While the central area of the Santo Barro territory was developing quickly, the outskirts were impoverished and barren. As a result, there were no soldiers or fortresses to protect the people. The place they lived was essentially a hunting ground for monsters and wild animals. A destitute-looking man was roasting a rat for a makeshift meal when he suddenly heard a rustling sound in the bushes behind him. He turned to look and saw the silhouette of a monster lurking inside. He screamed in terror and fled. Kim then emerged from the brush, holding the monster he had already beaten limp, puzzled as to why the man had run for his life. Life in this territory was actually pretty relaxing. During the day, he would explore the river forest and mountains to catch monsters. At night, he'd take the leftover spoils after his meal and sell them to the Adventurers Guild for some coin. Then he'd use his earnings to head to the tavern and listen to the locals sing. Kim had kept this routine for 2 weeks. It was a series of unbelievably leisurely and simple days. All day, every day, was just hunting and more hunting. With a 1-year deadline to return to the kingdom, he felt like he might be wasting too much time, but this was a very important part of his process. After returning from the Great Forest, Kim had picked up many new skills. Occasionally, he'd silently thank the two who had served as such good test subjects. Thanks to them, Kim was able to make full use of his skills. But unlike when he'd consumed the troll or the dragon, he had gained too many skills in a short amount of time, which meant Kim didn't have a clear grasp of where his own ability stood. Kim felt he couldn't face the ones who had bestowed these skills upon him. Therefore, he had spent the last 2 weeks trekking through the wilderness to test out all the skills he possessed. And today, after swinging by the tavern, Kim went to a prearranged meeting spot. The person giving him a report was one of the prince's attendants, who also happened to be a royal assassin. After hearing the update, Kim learned he had been given the green light to handle the Lord as he saw fit. He paused for a moment, wondering what would happen after the Lord was out of the picture. If the region fell into chaos, monsters would flood the area, and that would be a major problem for him. The assassin asked Kim when he planned to make his move. Kim's face broke into a confident grin as he asserted that starting a citywide riot was no big deal. He could even do it right now. 30 minutes later, an arrow plunged directly into Count Febo's chest. He glanced toward where the arrow had come from. On the roof of a nearby house stood a figure in a black cloak, already turning to leave. The royal assassin turned back to give a thumbs-up signaling a successful mission. Febo lay on the ground thinking that if you want to incite a crowd, you need to rally them together. And he already had many people ready to join his cause. Just by altering his voice slightly, he could mimic anyone. With that thought, he mustered his strength and bellowed that the mercenaries had committed murder and were trying to take over Santo Barro. He urged the people not to follow their orders any longer. The area immediately erupted into chaos, inciting the people to reclaim Santo Barro from the mercenaries. The large mercenary with the false gold tooth was sweating bullets, his eyes wide with rage, having no clue who was behind all this. This person was a phenomenal actor. To make matters worse, the fighting instincts of those infected by the drinking water had awakened. The streets were now in total chaos. The townspeople swarmed and attacked the mercenaries. At that moment, Kim stood on a rooftop, relaxing and enjoying the masterpiece of chaos unfolding below. Back at the palace, Hapek was reading a report about the riot in Santo Barro. It began when an angry mob started targeting mercenaries in the central area. The resentment of the local populace had boiled over. Those being beaten by the people included not just mercenaries, but refugees as well. In the end, the townspeople, mercenaries, and refugees were all brawling together. Count Febo had been killed, HPIC, put on a show of outrage, but inwardly he was applauding how cleanly everything had been executed. He crumpled up the report and shouted, demanding to know how such a tragedy was allowed to happen, and insisted that new articles be added to the law governing territories. Even if a lord is the rightful heir, if they are poorly evaluated by the king and high-ranking officials, they can now be stripped of their inheritance rights. In addition, the number of mercenaries stationed in a territory was limited to no more than half the number of soldiers assigned to that territory. At this, he flashed a satisfied smile. Everything had gone exactly according to plan. Kim was standing model. Observing the chaos below, he thinks to himself that if a lot of people die, fewer will remember him, just like back when he was at Mur on Earth. He turns to the royal assassin and asks, will this be over by tomorrow? The assassin confirms it will, but adds that there's just one problem. He still hasn't found out where Kim is heading next. Cabal love it, Kim replies. Apparently, the zines have been running rampant there lately. The place is also rumored to hold clues to a treasure map. A zine is a hybrid creature, a cross between a hawk and a lion, and these kinds of multi-species creatures just happen to be Kim's favorite. The royal assassin, now knowing the location, promises to meet him there later. With that, he vanishes in a flash. Kim is just about to head out when he senses someone standing next to him. At first, he thinks the assassin is still around, but when he glances over, he sees it's Zeon Hen. She's completely stunned to see that she's standing right in front of the one and only Sir Kim. Now, the zine species has an average height of about 7 to 10 feet and is a high-level monster with the head and forelegs of a hawk. This creature has a very awkward body structure. The top and bottom halves just don't seem to go together at all because its lower body causes it to stoop awkwardly in flight, while its upper body makes moving on the ground a real struggle, and they're forced to scurry around on foot. So whether they're in the air or on the ground, their bodies are only partially suited for either. Despite this, humans fear them, nicknaming them the Prince of the Sky and considering them to be high-level creatures. That's because even with all their design flaws, their combat skills are incredibly powerful. They can fly and also live in prides of several dozen, much like lions. What's more, they happen to like eating horses more than anything, which is why they sometimes attack humans. Over at the Zine's Rocky Mountain Range in C, Kim explains their mission, which was assigned by the joint human and horse expedition teams that often visit Kovet. The goal is to either eliminate or drive away the entire Zine flock. As he explains this to Zeon Hen, her eyes start to sparkle with excitement. Since the Zine flock is huge, he clarifies that they can't possibly wipe them all out. Their real goal is just to hunt the leader, to get them to back off. Before he can even finish, Zeon Hen enthusiastically shouts, "Yes, master." She then recites the classic saying, "A knight is one who always strives for their ideals, even in the face of a cruel reality, all for the peace of the people." No matter how difficult or dangerous the mission, they must face it with courage. Kim is completely floored by her sheer enthusiasm. Now, to understand why a holy knight from the theocracy is calling Kim master and tagging along, we need to rewind to the events of a few days ago. On the night of the rebellion in St. Barrow, the royal assassin was inside the castle and had just sent his target to meet their maker. With the mission complete, he was making his escape from the Lord's castle when he was spotted by Zeon Hen. Thinking he looked suspicious, she tailed him for a bit and eventually saw the assassin standing and talking with someone else. That person looked a lot like the big guy from the tavern she'd run into the day before. That's when she overheard the royal assassin call the other person Sir Kim. Zeon Hen's eyes went wide. She immediately rushed out in front of him. Startled that someone had seen him talking with the assassin, Kim's first instinct was to silence her for good. But Zeon Hen was completely oblivious to his intentions. She was too busy gushing over the man she heard was Sir Kim. "You're the one who traveled with the hero's party, the Knight of Knights, a living legend." Kim had no clue what she was talking about, but figured his best bet was to just play along. He cleared his throat and claimed he was on a secret mission. But before he could even ask her to keep quiet about it, Zeon Hen eagerly promised she would then beg him to take her on as his disciple. He just stared, frozen at the thought of gaining a disciple he never wanted. You see, a holy knight is a unique and vital asset to the theocracy, and unlike the saintess, who must never be harmed, the position of a holy knight is magically tracked to prevent any losses. This means that even if one of them is killed, the tracking magic automatically marks their killer. In other words, if Kim silenced this one witness, he'd have the entire theocracy hunting him down. So in the end, he reluctantly gave Zeon Hen an impossible task, which was to dig a huge cave. He intentionally gave her no tools, hoping she'd give up and leave, but she didn't complain one bit. With just her bare hands, she dug the entire cave and was somehow enthusiastic the whole time. When she finished, he could only squeeze his eyes shut, defeated by her persistence. Back at the Rocky Mountain Range, the cliffs are covered in zine nests and eggs. Since the creatures always bring prey back to their nests, the plan is to fight them right here. Instead of tracking them down, they'll just lie in wait and ambush them. Kim silently sizes up. Zeon Hen's strength, remembering how she dug that cave with her bare hands. Suddenly, she cheerfully points toward the nests. "The Zine flock has returned from a hunt." Zeon Hen asks him for orders and gets a simple reply: "Handle it yourself." Hearing this, thinking her master wants to test her abilities, Zeon Hen lets out a battle cry, hefts her sword onto her shoulder, and charges toward the flock of griffins. Kim watches from a cliff as the fight between a human and a griffin unfolds. The human is yanking on the beast's feathers, and the beast was yanking the person's hair. It was a total mess of a fight. He just covered his face, completely exasperated. A moment later, John Hen came back to the cave entrance where Kim was sitting, and she cheerfully announced her mission was complete. He gave her a quick once-over, sizing up her skills after that recent scuffle. Chaotic was the only word he could think of for that battle. He quickly figured out that she was afraid of swinging her sword too hard, worried it might break, so she loosened her grip, which made her slashes weak. After every attack, she would instinctively glance down to check on her sword, as a reflex which left her wide open for whatever came next. Kim noted that because she was so focused on those two things, her magic casting speed was also suffering and she was barely landing any hits. Hearing his critique, she squeezed her eyes shut in embarrassment, remembering the time back in the Holy Kingdom when she got a similar lecture from the Pope. She clenched her trembling fists, taking in the brutally honest feedback from the very master she looked up to. Then he said just one simple sentence: "You'd be better off just dropping the sword." Hearing this, John Hen couldn't help but shudder. A flood of questions like, am I not good enough, and am I really that useless, washed over her. Hen was crushed by Kim's words, but what he really meant was for her to drop the sword and fight like he does. In that instant it clicked, although his words were a bit harsh. He just wanted her to ditch her sword and fight barehanded like him. He then pointed out that on the other side, there was another flock of monsters telling her to come with him so he could personally demonstrate what real hand-to-hand combat looks like. John Hen silently thought to herself, this guy's absolutely nuts. Her eyes went wide as she watched Kim fight, and she stuttered in pure shock. What kind of fighting style is that? Kim glanced back at her, mentally running through the Holy Knight's abilities. Honestly, there was nothing special about them. Even though the sword was her main weapon, her swordsmanship was nowhere near the hero's level. And even when she combined it with light magic, it didn't have the punch of the prince's, and she couldn't even perform any special techniques. John Hen grabbed a Griffon by the neck as it dove for her head. As a modified human, her physical strength was impressive for sure. But it was obvious she wasn't even in the same league as the Saintess. In short, she had all the makings of a great companion for the hero, but she just couldn't capitalize on any of her strengths. He looked over at the griffin she'd just punched, leaving a deep, dark crater in its neck. She was just like that griffin. It had the traits of both an eagle and a lion, but when you put them together, the best parts of both animals just vanished. Kim glanced at John Hen standing behind him and continued his thoughts. She'd be unstoppable against an army of humans, but if she were to travel with the hero, she would probably have died from exhaustion long before they ever reached the Demon King's castle. But that's exactly why I can teach her, even though she's a disciple. I only took on reluctantly. He felt a little spark of joy in his heart, but after watching her fight that griffin, I've changed my mind. I genuinely want to train her. He thought to himself with a grin, because the Holy Knight John Hen Pitt is also a monster just like me. Kim did a quick head count of about 10 griffins circling towards them. He started rummaging in his pocket for something while saying, well, it'll be easier to just fight them all at once. Should I rile them up a bit? I think I put it in here somewhere. He pulled out a small pink pouch. Ah, here it is. A purple vortex-like light glowed from within the pouch. This was a Shenkun pouch, personally tested and created by a noble mage from the Gezain Kingdom, although it looked tiny on the outside. It was unbelievably spacious on the inside with a neat feature that let the owner pull out any item they were thinking of. From inside the pouch, he produced a massive leg of meat. Griffins have a thing for horse meat, right? The Holy Knight used it as bait to lure them in, and she did a pretty good job of it. Seeing the huge piece of horse meat in his hand, the griffin started to drool. Hey, you guys, want a bite of this? After asking, he tossed the meat onto the ground and stomped on it right in front of them. If you want it, then come and get it, you big dummies. The flock of griffins flew into a rage. They let out a deafening shriek and dived straight for him. Kim's expression remained completely calm. There's this thing called imitation fist. As the name implies, it's a Chinese martial art created by imitating the movements of animals. It's a fighting style that mimics how they move. I actually learned it way back when I was in China. At the time, I could already use animal bodies, so I figured learning imitation fist would make me even stronger, but I gave up on it pretty quickly. He remembered the time he almost accidentally choked out his instructor. Even though I was imitating animals at the end of the day, I was still stuck in a human body. It just couldn't truly replicate an animal's movements. Looking back, that was the biggest waste of my life. Martial arts are just techniques made to get the most out of our limited human strength, but for someone with limitless power. Like me, they're nothing but shackles. I don't use techniques like martial arts, I just use pure power. That is how I fight. A griffin swooped in talons out, aiming for his head. He instantly shot one hand up and caught it by the beak, even as its sharp beak pierced right through his now glowing blue hand. Gotcha. This is pretty fun. This is the first time I've ever tried to take on a creature this huge. Without a second's hesitation, he threw a punch straight into its head. The monster's skull caved in and its massive body came crashing down. He glanced at his strange blue hand. Looks like those demon tribes I ate back at Stack BS were not only... But some creatures are also part arthropod, and thanks to that, I got this awesome mantis shrimp limb. This little guy can punch with a force 2,500 times its own body weight, enough to seriously injure even large animals. Pretty handy, right? The other Ziffs, terrified of him, could only inch backward. Seeing how scared the pack was, he flashed a cruel smile. So what should I try out next? Oh, I remember now. The horned lizard's eye has that neat trick where it can shoot blood. What if that blood was from a pufferfish? John High watched the one-sided beatdown in terror as Kim continued to pummel the remaining Ziffs. Kim looked like he'd completely snapped his eyes, overflowing with dark red blood. This fight was about to get ugly. There were no techniques, no tricks, and no strategies, just pure, unfiltered violence. John High stood there completely frozen. This fighting style was the exact opposite of a holy knight's. But what was this feeling? Her heart was pounding, and the hand holding her sword began to shake. It felt like she was tossing aside everything the holy nation had ever taught her. If you have the power to shatter steel, why bother with basic martial arts? If you have incredible regenerative powers, why even bother dodging? So, what if the enemy has a good defense? I can just use my raw power to crush their resistance anyway. Zion High watched as the Zif pack was beaten so badly they couldn't even lift their heads, thinking to herself, if I could fight like that, if I were to toss this fragile sword and use a power that adapts to any situation. Just then she snapped back to her senses. She shook her head hard as if to force the thoughts away. No, I am a holy knight. I am a loyal servant of the goddess and the very face of the holy nation. As a holy knight, I can't afford to be so reckless. Meanwhile, Kim casually wiped a streak of blood from his cheek and asked, Did you get a good look? She jumped slightly. Ah, yes, master. He then asked her again, So, what do you think? John Hai hesitated. Well, you see, seeing her stumble over her words, he said firmly, You're wavering. You don't have to decide on anything right now. But before he could finish, she quickly cut in, Yes, master. It's just as you once said, Kim. The more carefully you think, the better. But the faster you decide, the better too. Isn't that right? 3 days later, Zif corpses were scattered all over the ground. Blood flowed like a river. Kim pointed to the extermination list in his hand and simply said, All right, we've taken care of all the Zifs in this area. Let's go. John Hai obediently followed, though. She couldn't help but tremble as she glanced back at the tragic scene. Over at the Santo Agnolo Adventurers Guild, a loud voice boomed from inside the building. What did you just say? A C-rank adventurer identification card sat on the table. An employee was taking notes while speaking with Kim. You're a C-rank adventurer. I understand your frustration, but no matter how much you complain, we can't take back the request. The higher-ups have already sent another party to exterminate the Zif nest. To make things easier, he had been using a new identity. Rach, 27 years old, a C-rank adventurer with the ex-Santo Almas organization. Kim couldn't help but wonder why. He was expected to just hand over the credit for clearing out the Zifs. The guild employee, a woman named Angela, simply closed her eyes and said it was an order from a superior. He shot back. Whose? Angela still refused to give a name. Kim smirked. He could tell she knew perfectly well who gave the order. He crossed his arms, figuring someone high up in the Santoa Bove Adventurers Guild was trying to steal credit from other adventurers. And what's more, the guild staff were clearly going along with it. Kim continued to poke at her, his tone dripping with sarcasm. It'd be a shame if a rumor like this started to spread, wouldn't it? Especially since my mouth tends to get awful loose after a drink or two. Angela had enough of his threats. She took off her glasses and let out a cold huff. Anger flashed across her face as she warned him, Know your place. How dare a C-rank? Nobody threaten the guildmaster. The moment she finished, Kim shot back. The guildmaster, you say? Angela visibly composed herself, sliding her glasses back on as she continued. Our master is incredibly powerful and frankly completely out of your league. She went on adding that this guildmaster was destined to become a hero. So there's no reason for him to meet with an adventurer like you. Hearing this, Kim simply raised a hand as if to say he had no intention of meeting the guy anyway. Suddenly she gasped as he grabbed her hand. It was a silent warning. Sooner or later, she'd be the one coming to find him. Completely missing the threat, Angela misunderstood his intention entirely. A blush crept up her cheeks as she stammered, I'm already engaged. His grip tightened and Angela froze. A sharp pain shot through her hand, and she screamed in agony. The sound echoed through the guild hall. Elsewhere, a middle-aged man stared off into the distance, lost in thought. This was Julio Avenir, an SSS rank adventurer and the guildmaster of the Covert region. His thoughts drifted back in time. To the past, 25 years ago, when he was a member of the Heroes Party. Back then, however, he was far from a standout member. The memories played out the Heroes Party slaying fearsome monsters, the legendary tales that followed them in their quest to exterminate. The Demon King. The legend told of how the goddess herself appeared like a terrifying monster and of a villain who had the power to even make any wish come true. He remembered kneeling at the goddess's feet, begging her to grant him the power he so desperately wanted. Fighting the enemy on equal ground, when he returned, he became the guildmaster, and for 20 years, Julio established himself as an influential high-status adventurer. You see, adventurers are both professional monster slayers for hire and a symbol of freedom. He achieved all of this thanks to a wish he was granted, which gave him political power. He broke into a sweat thinking about how adventurers are meant to symbolize freedom. Controlling them would be seen as oppression, and you would need an immense amount of influence to pull that off. Julio frowned when he noticed there were no adventurers in the Heroes Party. He figured the king had already made his first move. He paled at the thought of the second prince becoming the new hero, and having everyone cheer for a symbol of royalty instead of a symbol of freedom. He slammed his hand on the table, finding it unacceptable. He decided to quickly create a hero from the adventurers' ranks, one who could elevate their collective status. Julio had the perfect candidate in mind, his own son, Hoge Avenger. Just then, his son Hoge appeared, asking his father if it was true that he had stolen credit from another adventurer. Looking completely disheartened, Hoge told Julio that becoming a hero that way would be meaningless. Julio grimaced. and told his son not to get the wrong idea. This wasn't about favoritism. Julio explained that this was how you create a hero, not how you become one. He explained to Hoga that as the son of an adventurer, who had once fought alongside the hero to defeat the Demon King 25 years ago, his background was essential to produce a hero. He also reminded him that the future of all adventurers was riding on this. Hoga trembled, clenching his fists. He knew he had no choice but to obey. Suddenly, Julio and Hoagie were both startled by a piercing scream. It was Angel. Hoga panicked, flung the door open, and shouted to ask what was wrong. Instantly, the scene before his eyes showed adventurers falling one by one, and a man named Kim about to execute the person in his grasp. Hoga was stunned, unable to process what was happening until he saw Angel lying motionless, her hands twisted and mangled. Beyond recognition, absolutely furious, Hoga gritted his teeth and demanded if Kim was the one behind all this. Hearing Hoga call out, Kim turned his head toward the voice. A sharp clang of a sword rang out. Hoga let out a furious shout and lunged forward, intending to cut Kim down for daring to touch Angel. With just a glance, Kim effortlessly blocked the sword. With his bare hand, he easily shattered Hoga's sword into pieces. Hoga was astonished by his power, so stunned it was as if he couldn't believe his eyes, muttering, "What?" In a flash, Kim grabbed him by the neck. A fragment of the shattered sword spun like a pinwheel through the air and landed perfectly in his hand. Kim used one hand to choke, Hoga holding him tight while his other hand drew back, preparing to stab him. Julio, just arriving at the door, panicked and screamed at the sight. "Don't!" he yelled in fear, trying to stop him. But Kim, radiating pure killing intent, didn't even hesitate. In the next moment, the sword fragment pierced Hoga's forehead. Julio froze at the sight of his fallen son. He was stunned, numbly calling out Hoga's name. After taking care of business, Kim looked up and asked if he was the guild master. By this point, Julio was enraged, his face twisted with uncontrollable anger. His hand was already on his sword, ready for a fight. Despite his rage, he confirmed Kim's question with a yes, and asked who he was. Kim simply introduced himself as Zach, a C-rank adventurer. As if it all clicked, Julio spoke up, confirming he understood and apologized for stealing his credit. Kim stood silent for a few seconds, then suddenly raised his hand in a dismissive wave, turned around, and began to leave, telling him, "As long as you know." Julio was shocked, then gritted his teeth and asked if that was all. Kim had taken out all the adventurers, broken his future daughter-in-law's arms, and killed his son. In response to Julio's question, Kim glanced back. He pointed at Angel and said that because she wouldn't call for Julio, he had to do all this just to make him appear. Kim then pointed to another adventurer, explaining he was only unconscious because he'd tried to fight back. And as for Hoga, it was simply because he felt like sending him to the afterlife. Kim then pointed at Julio, who was scowling after hearing such ridiculous reasoning. Kim said he'd heard the apology, so he would let him off the hook. Julio was astonished and asked, "What Michua?" He raised his voice, not believing the reasons could be so trivial, and demanded to know if Kim had done this all by himself, or if someone else had sent him. Cutting him off, Kim said he didn't understand. Looking straight at him, Kim said he had no interest in things like credit, so Julio should mind his own business. However, this particular credit belonged to him, and he wouldn't forgive anyone who touched it. Kim turned to leave again, adding that if it weren't for this, things wouldn't have gotten so serious. Without another word, he left the door closing behind him. Julio could only watch Kim leave. Now, only the silhouette of Julio's back remained as he grappled with his own conflicting thoughts. Thinking he'd brought this on himself, then trying to justify it as being for the sake of adventure, even if his methods were questionable. He told himself sacrifices were necessary for the greater good, but really, it was all for his own ambition. His hand clenched into a tight fist, shaking uncontrollably as drops of blood started to seep from his palm. Unable to contain his rage, Julio slammed his fist into the ground, sending splinters of wood flying everywhere. Julio realized it was all for nothing. With bloodshot eyes and clenched teeth, he stewed over his losses, hating Kim for taking his family and the future he had so carefully planned. He roared, gathering the guilds, Bird of Paradise Feathers, Three Swords, the Veedbon Youth Guild, and Whirlwind Axe, fueled by pure hatred. Julio vowed to steal Kim's future in return. Elsewhere, Xion was sitting on a cushion lost in memories of her past. Back during her training in the Holy Kingdom, the instructors were always scolding her for not being able to control her power, which often led to broken weapons. This issue worried her constantly. She remembered her master telling her to just do whatever she wanted, and she wasn't. Sure, who to listen to? Outside, a crowd had formed, and someone announced that they had found Kim's location. Right on cue, as Kim was walking down the street, Julio appeared and blocked his path, which puzzled Kim since he'd already spared the man's life. With a face twisted by resentment, Julio reminded Kim of the teenager he'd killed just minutes ago. Of course, Kim remembered him perfectly. The man, having watched his own son's death, was here for revenge. He asked Kim if he knew the pain of losing a child. Thinking back on his own past, Kim knew that agonizing feeling all too well. Hearing Kim's response, the man was completely stunned. Then Kim's demeanor shifted. He coldly admitted to having killed many children. which naturally led their families to come after him. These words made the man's blood boil. Shaking, he asked what happened to them. In response, Kim simply spread his arms, a living testament to their failure. Julio, spotting what he thought was an opening, lunged forward in a blind rage, grabbing his sword and calling Kim a fool. He boasted that he'd spent many years on this sword, a weapon powerful enough to have once defeated dragons. He told himself that even in his old age, he was still the one and only triple S rank. Adventurer. He was going to make Kim regret ever crossing him. He swung the sword at Kim with all his might silently, wishing him a one-way trip to hell. Suddenly, a foul-smelling liquid sprayed through the air, but it didn't come from Kim. It came from Julio. Before the blade could even get close, Kim had already dealt the finishing blow. The sudden scream caught the attention of the few remaining knights. They took one look at the scene and fled terrified of the monster before them. Kim, meanwhile, was still a bit bewildered. Not quite sure what had just transpired, he walked forward, slowly stopping in front of a large pool of blood. He glanced over at Xian, who was standing amidst countless corpses. She was desperately trying to keep her emotions in check, her blood-stained hands trembling. When she felt his gaze, she turned and called out, "Master!" Seeing her like this, all Kim could do was stay silent. He walked over to her, sat down heavily against a nearby wall, reached into his bag and pulled out a piece of meat. He then nonchalantly started to eat. Seeing this, she quickly wiped. Her tears walked over and leaned against the wall beside him. Kim glanced at her and asked if she wanted some, offering her a piece. Without hesitating, she took it and took a big bite. However, the bizarre taste immediately made her drop to her knees and vomit. Seeing her reaction, he silently noted that she wasn't used to it. In truth, zippin' meat was famously disgusting. Taking a closer look at the creature's name, he was reminded of just how awful it tasted. After a moment, she sat down and began to open up to him, deciding to tell him a secret. Everyone believes holy knights are born with divine blessings, but the truth is they are all artificially created, made through the same process as goddesses. This wasn't a huge shock to Kim. The prince had already clued him in. She held up her slowly changing hands, explaining that they were test subjects for the technologies used to create the next generation of holy maidens. Hearing this, Kim couldn't help but be intrigued. She glanced at her trembling, deformed arm, believing it was a result of that experiment. Xian clenched her fist bitterly. The earlier massacre was also her fault. She had lost control. He looked at her. It all made sense now why he'd felt a strange connection to her from the very beginning. He never thought he'd meet someone else like him, someone without parents. Even that person he detested was the same, which was why he was always so guarded and hid his true abilities. But in front of her, he didn't feel the need to hold back because he knew they were the same kind of person, that she was a monster too. But at the end of the day, they had just caused a huge incident by wiping out an expedition, the team and its captain. At that thought, he sat up and told her to go on ahead and buy train tickets as they couldn't stay here any longer. She was confused by the sudden request. He just closed his eyes and said he had some things to take care of. Seeing his expression, she quickly nodded and hurried off. Once she was gone, Kim, who had sensed an observer for a while, called out for them to show themselves. A stranger slowly appeared. Pushing himself off the wall, he respectfully complied. He calmly inquired about the price, knowing full well that the officials only suspected the Holy Knight was an experimental subject and had no concrete proof. But since she had just confirmed it, he knew the situation was about to become more complicated. Hearing this, the assassin handed him a small pouch containing just a few coins for travel and a new identification card. From now on, he was to be Jack, a level 4 mercenary from Alice's mercenary company, and the assassin asked where he was headed next. He turned his back and uttered a single name, Santo Cago. He remembered that the first time he'd met. Her had been there as well. At the thought, he couldn't help but look forward to their reunion. Meanwhile, Felina was sitting in a carriage, her eyes closed, silently, wondering, how on earth did it come to this? Felina peeked at the two people across from her, thinking, why are these people here? At that moment, Kim was studying a map, while John Hen was fast asleep. Felina looked at Kim and thought, that adventurer. She remembered the time Kim beat someone up. He's the dangerous guy who caused that huge commotion at the bar. Kim's terrifying smile had frightened Felina the moment she first walked in. Furthermore, not long after, in that village where the Big Po faction rebellion occurred, could he be connected to it? Felina then glanced over at John Hen and thought, and this one over here? That day, Felina had been in her room when she heard a noise outside. She looked out the window, wondering what it was. She saw John Hen with green hands and sharp claws covered in sauce, a terrifying grin on his face. Felina whispered to herself, I have to get out of here fast. She thought he was the one who caused the massacre at the market. Because of these two, I had to cancel all my plans and flee in such a hurry, and now we're even in the same carriage. Felina cracked her eyes open and plotted, when we get to Santo Cago, I have to switch to a different carriage. Getting involved with people like this will only get me beaten to a pulp. We're almost there, so I just have to endure it a little longer. Suddenly, a voice shouted, A dungeon! A dungeon has appeared! Felina was stunned, letting out a, huh. The carriage was now inside a large cave with a red glow emanating from within. At this moment, Baron Kago was getting worried. He said, "You said it's a dungeon. Is this true?" The servant replied, "Yes, Your Excellency. It is said that an area within a 500-meter radius of the southern waterway has been overrun by the dungeon." The Baron gritted his teeth. "A dungeon, it must be them." He clenched his fist and cursed. "Those adventurers are the only ones who see this as good news. They don't even pay half their taxes yet. They want all the benefits for themselves. When they're actually needed, they don't lift a finger. They're no different from parasites just looking out for themselves. This is all because of that madman Giulio Adventure." The Baron gritted his teeth, thinking of the brown-haired adventurer. He cursed. "That piece of trash, he's the one who always protects the rights of those adventurers. He's in league with them." He passed that absurd law stating that dungeons belong to adventurers. They're just a bunch of chaotic swindlers who do whatever they please. And now they're demanding freedom. He was the one who secured those rights for that lot. It's all because of that bastard. The Baron remembered Giulio's face. He rubbed his forehead and asked, "How can we commission someone to handle the dungeon?" The servant said, "I'm afraid no one will accept this request. Perhaps only the low-class adventurers who are content with just making a quick buck will, those good-for-nothings. Will the domain's army even let them enter?" The Baron said. The servant replied, "I hear they will consider it, Your Excellency." The Baron cursed. "Really?" Suddenly a soldier burst in the door and yelled, "Your Excellency!" The Baron snapped, "What is it? What could possibly be more important than this?" The soldier holding a large crest said, "My apologies. I have received an order that no matter what I must deliver this to you personally." The Baron was surprised to see the crest. He then smiled and said, "That, haha, Giulio Avventure. That madman is dead. I'm in such a wonderful mood. Well done, Sir Kim. Truly is a knight among knights. Truly, a cut above the rest," he said to Kim, who was sitting opposite him. Behind Kim, John Hen spoke up. "Baron, my master, also doesn't actually go by that name." The Baron replied, "Haha, is that so? Then let's pretend I didn't say anything. What about you, Sir Jack?" Kim said, "Please don't attach Sir to the name of a dragon warrior." The Baron replied, "I understand. Very well then. Dragon warrior Jack, from now on I will report everything that happens to you at the dungeon. The dungeons on continent E1 are creatures in the most anomalous state. It's a mound of earth with a large entrance with a red light glowing from deep within. Like snails on earth, it can grow underground. The internal structure of the dungeon is a spiral. They eat soil and use that material to form a spiral shell that creates a maze. This spiral lies underground with its entrance protruding above the surface. And then at some point, when the entrance above ground opens, a pheromonal scent is released that attracts monsters. When the monsters go inside, they will be made more ferocious by the dungeon's magic. They grow sharp teeth, and their eyes turn a terrifying bloodshot red, forming a living shield to protect what lies in the deepest part of the dungeon. If the dungeon becomes filled with these monsters, they will spill outside and wreak havoc. Hundreds of monsters will pour out and harm people. At that point, the dungeon is considered breached. But dungeons are not always harmful to humans. During their growth process, the substances they secrete combine into raw gemstones and minerals. Dungeons can create countless colorful gemstones, and on top of that, with the dungeon's mana, it's possible they even hold special powers, not to mention all the rare species, strange plants, and magical sources. With so much to gain, tons of adventurers want to find dungeons. Besides, a dungeon break doesn't happen every day. That's where the real conflict starts. The Lord and the townspeople don't know when a dungeon will break, and they want to deal with that dungeon as quickly as possible. Otherwise, monsters will start plaguing the citizens. However, adventurers aren't in a hurry to clear the dungeon. They want to keep profiting as much as they can, like by mining for gemstones. So these two interests are always clashing with each other. Baron explained, and that's exactly the situation in Santo Kago. Kim replied, "I see." The Baron said, "That's why I have a commission for you." Just then, at the entrance to the Santo Kago dungeon, a manager wearing glasses was flanked by two guards. One of them spotted Kim approaching and said, "Halt, please show me your adventurer's license." Kim stated, "I am a dragon warrior." The soldier replied, "What if you're a dragon warrior you can't enter? Why would a dragon warrior come all the way out here get lost?" Kim promptly kicked him hard. He said, "Who says I can't come to a dungeon, huh?" Another soldier ran over, asking, "What's going on?" Kim immediately gifted him a punch and replied, "Too noisy. I'm on a job." The terrified man with glasses fell to the ground and asked, "Wait a moment, what's happening?" Suddenly, Kim glanced back and saw two other men appear, asking, "What's wrong?" He then immediately bolted into the dungeon. The man with the glasses knelt on the ground and said, "Please help me. Some crazy mercenary just attacked us." The two newly arrived soldiers said, Hey, don't worry. We'll catch him right away. You just wait." Kim went inside the dungeon with a soldier following behind. He glanced at him. The man took off his helmet. It was John Hen. "Master," she said. Kim responded, "You're here." John Hen replied, "Yes. The Baron did a good job blocking the entrance." "Didn't he? Wow, so this is a dungeon. A place only adventurer parties can enter." Kim asked, "Is that why you're interested?" John Hen replied, "No, sir, but I am very interested in the heroic deeds that will be written in your chronicles, Master." Kim said, "Is that so?" John Hen said, "Master, it's really deep in here." Kim agreed. "That's right, the dungeon is getting darker." He thought to himself, "But if I use my dragon eyes, I can see my surroundings." Thinking this, he transformed his eyes. Kim glanced at John Hen beside him and thought, as expected, her eyes have changed too. Suddenly, John Hen called out, "Master!" A growl was heard, and 3 rows of sharp teeth appeared before the two of them. It was a horde of red-eyed monsters with mouths full of 3 rows of sharp teeth waiting for them up ahead. Kim said, "Here we go. The Baron's commission is to clear out this dungeon." Not long ago, the Baron had said to Kim, "I'm counting on you." John Hen had asked, "Isn't that illegal? The territory's law forbids interfering with a contract made with the Lord." The Baron said, "You're quite knowledgeable, Holy Knight, but adventurers aren't citizens of the territory. Adventurers are just outsiders who enjoy the rights of the territory's citizens. So please stick to the plan for me. Also for today, I will temporarily assign you, Holy Knight, to the guard unit. The larger the dungeon, the more it will contaminate the water and harm the people of the territory. Please complete this task for me as quickly as possible." Back in the present, Kim and John Hen were facing 7 monsters. He thought, destroying the dungeon will let me eat the creatures inside, so this proposal is a win-win for both of us. Kim said, "All right, you give it a try." John Hen replied, "Yes, Master," and stepped forward. She began to transform. Veins bulged. Fangs grew long. Her arm turned a veiny purple, and then her hand grew larger and sprouted sharp claws. Her mouth turned blood red. A long, sharp horn grew from her head wings, burst from her back. A spiked tail appeared, and her eyes glowed a brilliant yellow. Kim thought, it's the same transformation magic, but the way she transforms is different from me. Kim remembered when John Hen threw up her food and thought, she doesn't transform by eating like I do. If this is the result of the experiment she mentioned, then there's a high probability she's had surgical implants. John Hen let out a loud roar and charged at the monsters. She rammed straight into one monster, the sharp horn on her head immediately, piercing right through it, and the monster dropped dead. Another one roared and lunged at her. She planted her feet, then jumped up and pinned that one to the dungeon wall. Pulling her sharp horn out, she glared at the remaining monsters. One opened its mouth to roar, but was immediately slammed to the ground. John Hen advanced on the monsters. They surrounded her, opening their mouths full of sharp teeth. A moment later, a tearing sound was heard. John Hen had ripped a monster clean in half. The pack of monsters had been completely wiped out. John Hen, trembling slowly, transformed back. She knelt, panting, and returned to her human form. Kim asked, "Are the other holy knights like this, too?" John Hen asked, No, this is unique to me. The other holy knights only have muscle and bone tissue implants." Kim remarked, "That sounds expensive." John Hen replied, "Yes, the hardest part was finding a mimic. Although thanks to it, I can maintain my human form. The cost did cause some problems." Kim thought, a mimic. I'm sure that was in the bestiary. He remembered reading the book. Its main characteristic is transforming into other creatures or objects. It often turns into a treasure chest to ambush adventurers. He pictured its beast form or its treasure chest form lined with sharp teeth. Kim said, "You must have gone through a lot." "Difficult." John Hen replied, "No, my memory was erased. This is just something I was told. It's nothing significant." Kim kept walking and replied, "All right then." He stopped in front of a monster's corpse, picked it up, and said, "This one's quite special. This one isn't in the illustrated guide. Has it been mutated by the magic in the dungeon? Let me have a taste." With that, he opened his mouth and took a huge bite, tearing the flesh with his teeth and chewing, but Kim's expression changed instantly. He began vomiting violently. Kim collapsed to the ground, breathing, heavily panting. He said, "What is this?" He looked at the monster's corpse and thought, this isn't just simple monster flesh. It's the dungeon, because of the dungeon's magic. He looked at the corpses of the monster swarm again and thought, these monsters aren't actually alive. They're just biological weapons that can move thanks to magic, because they're moved by magic, not by the interaction of muscle groups. I can't mimic or eat them. He thought about the magic that controlled the monster. It feels like chewing sandpaper. He struggled to breathe. This strange object is not compatible with my anime power. Thanks to its blessing, I've now vomited for the second time since I was born. He dug his hands into the ground. Even the saintess, who has magic flowing through her veins instead of blood, would feel this way after eating its flesh. But before her transformation, the saintess was also human. The bones and muscles implanted in her body were also from living animals. The magic flowing in place of blood, and her body is also similar to blood, so there wouldn't be such a strong rejection. He remembered that the saintess had to endure a snake's bite to be transformed. He thought, but these monsters. Suddenly he said, it's not like that. John Hen called out, "Master." Kim placed a hand on his face and said, "We need to hurry." John Hen replied, "Yes, In your Analects, master. Kim, it is written that a knight swings his sword, not for pleasure, but so that tears no longer have to fall right. We must reduce the amount of time the dungeon can harm the people of Santok Nago as much as possible. Kim said, that's right. He gritted his teeth and thought, the monsters in this dungeon have more skills than the monsters on the surface. There might even be some that are stronger than dragons. He clenched his fist. Kim kicked the monster corpse at his feet hard. He gritted his teeth, thinking, but I'm no ordinary person. I'll quickly destroy this mediocre dungeon and then go somewhere I can find something to eat. With that, Kim and John Hen continued onward. The SSS Class Explorer's Illustrated Guide to Monsters by Julio Aventura. It was a thick purple-covered book. The renowned explorer. Julio Aventura wrote the book describing the dungeon's unusual terrain. Magic surged everywhere like tree branches, spreading through the dungeon. The monsters evolved under special circumstances. They looked like dogs, but had 3 rows of sharp teeth. Treasure was hidden in every nook and cranny, just waiting to be claimed. Capable explorers could obtain both immense fame and fortune. Kim cursed. Seriously, what a joke. This isn't evolution. It's a posthumous deformity. I just want to beat up the author of that book. Not that I could kill a man who's already dead. Kim trembled, clenching his fists. However, the only thing I can do here is, he thought as he transformed his hand out of anger. With that, he rushed forward and tore several monsters to shreds. The two continued deeper inside. Suddenly, someone appeared and asked, are you the rescue team? Help us. My comrades are inside. Kim said, you can go meet your maker too, and took off the man's head. John Hen asked, Master, why did you... Kim said, look closely. That's an undead. John Hen exclaimed, ah, you're right. There's a hole in his chest. Kim replied, it looked fresh. That's why you were mistaken. Kim placed his hand on the cave wall. He thought, this place looks like a cave. A dungeon, after all, is a living creature. My hand on the wall is sensing everything. So if I use this ability, I should be able to find this creature's vital parts. Kim thought of his exploratory tentacles. He pulled his hand back and said, we're almost there. John Hen said, we got here so fast, Master. Normally, when tackling a 500-meter class dungeon, it takes 12 hours no matter how fast you go. Kim said, and yet we only took half that time. So explorers really are that useless. John Hen said, isn't it because you're so amazing, Master? You didn't take any detours and went straight down. How can normal explorers compare to you? They waste so much time just finding the way. Kim said, John Hen. John Hen replied, yes, Master. Kim said, I know you're trying to praise me in any way you can, but if you're going to compare me to those useless people just to flatter me, I don't need it. He looked at his hand and continued, and doing so is also an insult to the one who gave me this power. John Hen said, I'm sorry, Master. I didn't mean it that way, but do you mean the person who taught you that pathfinding ability was that person, your friend, Master Miss? Kim laughed and replied, a friend? We weren't that close. We fought more than we talked, but he hated people who used violence against the innocent. He remembered the time he rushed at some bad guys and tore a person's head off with a single chop, and his friend yelled, stop right there, you bastard. I'll control you so strictly you won't be able to stand it. Kim said he was brave enough to sacrifice himself for a battle. He couldn't win. At that moment, his shaggy, one-eyed friend had bravely stood in front of him. Right now, Kim, seeing a glimpse of his old friend in her expression, Dion Hen began. Master, noticing Kim was a bit zoned out, she asked, Master, if it's not too much trouble. Is that person? Kim confirmed, yes, he's dead. Kim licked his lips, placed a hand over his heart, thought back to his last moments with that friend, and said, but what he left behind is still a part of me even to this day. The two of them then came upon a door. It was cracked open slightly. Dion Hen remarked, this building looks ancient. It has to be over 150 years old. It looks like the dungeon swallowed whole ancient villages from the past. So does that mean the undead we just met were people from here? She thought back to the undead from earlier, and last night Kim replied, no, those are newly formed undead. They don't even realize they're dead. They must have been part of the expedition team that broke in from the outside. Besides, that undead had a hole clean through its chest. Dion Hen said, meaning there's a monster up ahead that caused that piercing wound. Kim replied, sharp deduction. He placed his hand on the door and gently pushed it open. Kim's eyes widened. The two of them stepped inside to find a blue-winged monster that looked like a dragon. Kim asked with curiosity, a dragon? Before them was a creature with glowing red eyes. Its front limbs had webbing, much like a frog's. Kim said, no, it's a creature that resembles a wyvern. Dion Hen asked, it's that big. And it's not a dragon, Kim replied, look closer. Its front legs are its wings, which makes it a wyvern, not a dragon. But to be precise, while it looks like a wyvern, it's not a standard creature you'd find in a dungeon. Dion Hen noted, this thing has... She examined its form more carefully. A snake's body bat wings, a lizard's head, horns, frog legs. The top half is blue, but further down, it slowly turns purple. She concluded, "It's a single creature, but its body is made from many different ones." Kim nodded. "Exactly, it's a chimera of various dungeon monsters. That's what it truly is." He wondered if some crazed mage had stitched this monstrosity together and left it in the dungeon to grow to this size. Or perhaps different creatures were mutated by the dungeon's mana and just happened to fuse together. Kim looked at the monster before him and thought, "Which is it? I don't know the truth, but I have a strong feeling about this." A churning sensation grew in his stomach. How unpleasant, he thought. The monster's gaze was now fixed on him, and Kim felt as if he were looking into a distorted mirror. You could almost call it a kindred spirit, since its body was also a patchwork of many creatures. But is this simply the result of magic gone haywire? Could this giant hybrid beast be the dungeon boss? Utterly disgusting, Kim assessed the monster. He thought, "I haven't been this disgusted since my cousin came home from his military service and was still picking on elementary school kids." He remembered his cousin showing off for the younger kids. He continued his thought, so proud of a video game console his parents bought for him. That arrogant jerk. He was too out of shape to even qualify as an active duty soldier. Dion Hen asked, "Master, what's our plan?" Kim gestured with his hand and said, "Stay back. I'll handle this." He thought, "Its size is perfect to act as a punching bag for all my pent-up anger. In that case, I'll face it with a similar size." Kim began to transform. He channeled the lungs and blood vessels of a great dinosaur and the bone marrow of an ogre. His arms swelled and bulged with veins taking on the muscles of a demon and the hide of a salamander. His fingers grew slick with the slime of a jumper monster. He thought, "I will become a dragon." In that instant, his transformation was complete. Kim now stood as a great red dragon facing the wyvern. Kim let out a thunderous roar. Outside the dungeon entrance, the rest of the group remained on guard. The man in glasses muttered, "Because of those damn mercenaries, we're stuck in this miserable mess. As soon as they emerge, I'll use the full authority of the expeditionary team to..." Before he could finish, the ground began to shake violently. The entire area around the cave entrance trembled. The man with glasses shouted, "An earthquake! What's happening? What in the world is going on?" Inside, Kim was in a roaring match with the wyvern. The wyvern was clearly shaken. It broke out in a cold sweat. After collecting itself, the wyvern roared back defiantly. It then raised its leg and slammed it squarely into Kim's face, even letting out a triumphant roar. Kim caught its leg easily. He sneered, "You call that an attack? You're weak, light, and full of openings. What were you even trying to do?" Suddenly, the wyvern's spiked tail shot forward. Kim dodged the strike, but the tail immediately whipped around, wrapping tightly around Kim's neck. The wyvern bared its venomous fangs. It roared once more and lunged. Kim thought to himself, those venomous fangs, could they be the ones that inflict the bite of death? The wyvern now had its teeth sunk into Kim's neck. He thought, a clever move, but ultimately useless. If these were just normal dragon scales, maybe. But these are dragon scales coated in mithril, which is a whole different league. At that moment, the wyvern's fangs shattered to pieces. Kim's hand shifted from red to green. He reached out, grabbed the wyvern's chest, and said, "So annoying. Hold still." All at once, the wyvern's eyes bulged wide. A strange fluid sprayed out from them, drenching Kim's head. He squinted and mused, "Is this the poison blood from the bite of death? Since it couldn't bite me, it's hoping the poison will seep in through my skin. But here's the thing. This type of poison was one of my first basic skills, and it was also the very first poison I ever used in an experiment on myself." As he spoke, Kim casually licked the fluid off his face. He said, "If you're out of tricks, shall we end this here? I take no joy in bullying the weak." With that, Kim extended his claws and tore into the wyvern. But then Kim looked down at the creature before him and mused to himself, "What's wrong with me? I'm the dungeon boss. Why on earth did I come into a dungeon?" He then remembered how the monster had turned back into a person. "Ah, that's right," he thought. At that moment, as the thought crossed his mind, the wyvern began to fall to the ground, collapsing completely. Kim stared at it pensively. John Hen asked, Master, are you all right?" "I'm fine," Kim replied, though he wondered, did I just see that wrong? It smiled right before it died. He replayed the wyvern's final moment in his mind. What was that all about? Still no use dwelling on it. Maybe traveling with my own kind for once has me thinking about this nonsense. He shook his head. "Let's go." John Hen replied, "Yes, master." With that, the two of them departed. Kim recalled what the legendary adventurer Giulio Adventurera had written about the entities found inside dungeons. According to Giulio's book, the dungeon entity, known as the Dungeon Core, is a spherical creature with a circumference of about 2 meters. It's described as looking like a cotton ball, its entire body covered in soft fur with a pair of large, sparkling round eyes on top. Although it's timid, it is also very gentle. Apparently, if you befriend one, it will even obey humans. But in reality, the creature looked more like a lumpy pink mass of flesh covered in countless eyes and mouths. Kim and John Hen were completely stunned. John Hen finally asked, "This looks a little different from the descriptions, master." Kim nodded. "I'd say so. Perhaps And with that, he kicked it. The dungeon. Kor let out an angry shriek. Kim continued unfazed. It probably uses pheromones to lure other creatures. There's no guarantee that the form we're seeing is its true appearance. John Hen just said, oh. Kim elaborated, if you have some kind of resistance to chemical or mental attacks, you won't be affected by the pheromones and can see its real form. The cute appearance most adventurers see is just the Dungeon Core's last-ditch defense mechanism, a form it takes to trigger protective instincts. John Hen's eyes lit up. I know about that. It's in the Analects of Sir Kim, evil and poison are two sides of the same coin. They can appear beautiful at any moment to lure in the unsuspecting right. You said that during the war with Francis de Bardaillot. Kim sighed. That's right, he thought to himself. Who on earth even wrote those Analects now? I'm actually curious. Anyway, more importantly, he then drew his weapon. John Hen asked, Master, you use a weapon like that as well? Kim replied, I do, but I'm not going to kill it. I'm going to eat it. John Hen's jaw dropped as she stared at the lumpy mass of flesh. So you're going to eat this? Of course, Kim said, and then split the dungeon core in two with a single clean slice. Bringing his knife down again, he said, first, I need to carve it up to make it edible. He thought, as for the dungeon, Core's magic. I don't really need its main abilities. However, the skill to harden earth into a shell or the one for pheromone synthesis, now those are very interesting. Kim continued to slice away while he pondered this. John Hen could only watch, breaking out in a cold sweat before turning green and throwing up. A dungeon is essentially the dungeon core's shell. In other words, a part of its body. On the cave walls, the veins of magical energy like blood vessels were already starting to fade. Once the dungeon core ceases to function, the flow of mana throughout the dungeon is cut off. At that point, both the dungeon and its monsters can no longer sustain themselves, causing the entire structure to collapse. Ominous rumbles were already echoing from deep within the cave. According to the Adventurer's Guide, the average collapse time for a dungeon is about 48 hours. Anyone who can't escape in that window gets buried alive. But escaping a monster-free dungeon in 48 hours, Kim thought, is child's play for me. The pair moved swiftly, and soon the cave entrance was right in front of them. John Hen cried out, Master, I see the exit. Sticking her head out, she exclaimed, it looks like we only took 3 hours. That's even faster than our trip in... But waiting for them was a group of soldiers, all pointing their weapons right at them. An officer shouted, Freeze! You're the mercenaries, aren't you? You're under arrest on suspicion of assaulting an adventurer. The man in glasses sneered, Ha ha, you got what you deserved, you filthy mercenaries. Resistance is futile. The two simply stared back. Then a faint smile appeared on Kim's face. He held out his hands. That's right, I'm a mercenary. A pair of shackles was clamped onto his wrists, and he was escorted onto a carriage. Kim sat inside, his head bowed in silence as a memory surfaced. He'd been cuffed and transported in a vehicle just like this one before. A small smile touched his lips. Heh, I've been through this before, haven't I? Meanwhile, one morning a boat was gliding peacefully across the water. On board, a woman named Felina was playing an instrument while two men chatted on deck. Ah, it feels great to be this idle, doesn't it? And it's all thanks to Prince Eswar. Because of him, the war with the demon tribe is finally over. From now on, the kingdom can look forward to nothing but peace and prosperity. Speaking of which, I wonder when we'll get attacked by pirates. Done talking about the demon tribe already? Well, this is a river, so I guess we'd have to call them river pirates, right? Haha, stop messing around. Besides, what kind of idiot would target a passenger ship with nothing on it worth stealing? Right as the words left his mouth, the ship was struck by a powerful impact. An alarm blared across the deck. Pirates have been spotted. All hands prepare for battle. At that very moment, a pirate ship rammed into their vessel's side. The two men from before could only stammer in a panic, You've got to be kidding me. Iron grappling hooks flew through the air, latching onto the ship's railing. Their captain roared, Capture every last one of them. Don't let a single soul escape. We the Straw Hat River. Pirates are taking over the ship. One pirate slashed a crewman's arm, causing him to cry out in pain. Another sent his fist into a sailor's gut, making the man grunt. Their leader barked, Hey, don't rough them up too much. They're no good to us if they can't work. A man on the ground asked, Work? Do you mean as slaves? You bastard, slavery has been outlawed in the Gorgon Kingdom. The leader said, That's right, it's banned here. But what about in other countries? The old sailor said, Your outfits, your methods. Are you connected to Captain Phillip? He remembered the silhouette of the captain with a cigar in his mouth. The leader said, I'm surprised a fisherman like you knows my father. You must be quite knowledgeable about life on the open sea, huh? The old man said, You bastard Philip was a pirate, but he still had a basic code of honor. To think his son would be a slave trader? Before he could finish, the old man was kicked. The leader laughed and said, My father got caught because he was obsessed with that so-called honor. Money in one's life are far more important. He ordered, Tie them all up and lock them in the hold. The soldiers replied, Yes, boss. As they began to gather everyone on the ship, a hand suddenly pushed open a door and said, Ultimately, selling slaves might yield less profit than a ransom, but it's still money. It's also much safer since you're targeting less armed vessels. The man continued speaking as he emerged. It was Kim holding a small monster in his hand. He took a bite and added, Quite logical. The leader commented, You're pretty sharp. He thought to himself, This punk looks like a mercenary, but he reeks of a vicious thug. He's definitely my kind of person. He put on a straw hat and said, I like you, join me. He held out his hand to Kim. Jion Hen stood frozen. Kim chuckled and reached out his hand, which began to transform. Jeonhin cried out, "Master, what are you doing?" "He's a vicious sea pirate." As Kim's hand, now sparking with embers, was about to touch the leader's, suddenly, a blinding light flashed. A massive flame burst from Kim's hand, swallowing the leader whole. Kim said contemptuously, "Why should I submit to a being more pathetic than myself?" He recalled gaining a new ability not long ago after eating a Danjin core. It was the core of a many-eyed, many-mouthed dungeon, which gave him the power to freely control pheromones, a form of faint purple magic. The Danjin core synthesizes chemicals in a modified liver-like organ within the body to produce pheromones. These pheromones flow through the bloodstream, accumulate in the subcutaneous sweat glands, and are then secreted externally through his martial techniques. Kim remembered how the pheromones were metabolized and released from his body. It was at this point that I thought of something interesting. A dragon synthesizes flammable materials within its body, but since they're generated in the lungs, it can only spew fire from its mouth. This flammable substance is stored in the dragon's lungs, enabling it to breathe fire. A gohammer's sweat glands eject a slime under extreme pressure, creating a highly viscous discharge. It's an ability seen in lizard-type creatures. The blood vessels of a giant dinosaur transport blood throughout its auxiliary hearts. A dragon has as many as 3 hearts. What if I combine these traits, synthesize a dragon's flammable substance using the Danjin core's internal chemical factory, then let it flow through the bloodstream? Next, transport this fuel throughout the body using the system of a giant dinosaur's hearts. Finally, use the extreme pressure of the sweat glands to release the substance. It would then ignite upon contact with the air due to atmospheric friction. Kim thought back to how he channeled the flammable substance through his blood vessels and discharged it from his fingertips, causing an explosion. He realized his hands could now shoot fire. The last time he was handcuffed, he had wondered, wasn't I dragged away by a carriage right after I got out of the dungeon? He was being escorted onto a horse-drawn cart. But as it turned out, those were Namsig Wanagu's soldiers. Kim went along with them, and they later let him go. The arrest of a ragged mercenary was just a performance to fool the other explorers. If that wasn't the case, why would Kim have allowed himself to be handcuffed so easily, just giving a slight smile? Returning to the present, the leader was now burnt to a crisp. Kim remarked, "That came in handy." The underlings yelled, "The boss, you son of a bitch! That's fire-based magic. Quick, use water magic to put it out." As one of them began to cast a magic circle, he was cut down with a single slash. He let out a gasp and collapsed behind Jeonhin. But right now, her attention was solely on the sword she was holding. Another pirate yelled, "This bitch!" and rushed toward Jeonhin. With swift and light movements, she dealt each one a single blow. She glanced at her hand, tightly gripping the sword, and thought, what is this feeling? The sensation of holding a sword is completely different than before. What is this unfamiliar feeling? She lowered her head to look at her sword again. Meanwhile, Kim held his hands out in front of him, 2 streams of purple smoke spraying from his palms toward the pirate ship. A pirate shouted, "It's poison! That coward is using poison!" He covered his nose and jumped onto the passenger boat, yelling, "Get over to their ship! I've jumped to their ship, so I should be clear of the poison now." But he was enveloped in a mist. Squinting, he wondered, mist. Just as he looked around, a hand seized his face. Kim grabbed his head and released the toxic gas directly from his palm. Wondering about the mist, just as he looked over, a hand grabbed his face. Kim seized his head as his own hand released a toxic gas and leaned him over the side of the boat. The robber could only make muffled sounds, and then Kim let go, letting the robber fall into the water. The robber couldn't move and could only stammer, You... Kim looked at his own hand and said, "So it depends on the mixture of materials." Chemicals that could spread paralyzing gas poison or create a smokescreen were all viable options. Suddenly a figure appeared behind him. A tall, burly man slashed down with a sword, but Kim's legs immediately shot out flames, launching him high into the air to dodge. He then reinforced his fist and threw a punch. A punch from above sent the man sinking deep into the ship's deck below. A few drops of ketchup splattered. Kim then remarked that because his legs shoot out fire, they also provide thrust. He could leap this high without needing any muscular transformation in his legs. Kim turned his head and asked who it was. It turned out to be the next guinea pig. At that moment, Felina was standing behind Kim, sweating and thinking to herself, "Why are you here again?" A while later, Kim and John Hay were sitting on the ship's rail while the sailors cleaned up the mess of pirates. One of the sailors bowed and said, "Thank you both so much. We are truly grateful that you saved us." Kim replied, "All right, now hurry up and get things sorted so you can set sail." John Hay looked at her hands and said, "Master." She recalled the feeling of holding the sword earlier. What was that feeling? Everything felt so different. It was as if this sword had become a part of my body. Glanced at the sword in her hand. It seemed like the first time. She glanced behind her at the people she had just defeated and thought, the condition of the corpses is so clean. Before it was always so messy. She looked at her hands and asked him, "Has something like this ever happened before? No matter how much I think about it, I can't figure it out. Master, do you know what this feeling is?" Kim said while eating, "I'll teach you how to properly move your body." John Hay asked, "What? But haven't I already been trained on how to move, according to my body type?" Kim replied, "That was training for things within the realm of humans. But what about you?" John Hay recalled her transformation ability and said, "Ah," Kim continued, In the dungeon, you use 10% of your power, but in this recent battle, I saw you use 30%. Your fighting style has changed, and your abilities have improved. John, hey, asked happily. Really? But Master, how do you shoot fire from your hands? If I learn, how can I do it? 2. Kim glanced at her, thinking to himself. Burning them alive is when I incinerate an opponent to a crisp. Blinding them with poison is when I release poison gas into a crowd. Paralyzing and drowning them is when I threw that pirate into the water. Those are the things you're saying you want to learn now? The more you mature, the more your humanity fades. Kim thought as he glanced at John Hay. When you're fully mature, I don't think you'll become someone like me. That's what Kim thought. At the Hennetus trading port, the largest fishing port in the Gojan Kingdom, boats were docking and houses were packed closely together. John Hay said, Whoa, this is my first time in a place like this. It's a seaport city. Master, have you ever been here, Before she could finish, she saw a merman swimming by. John Hay exclaimed, A merman from the demon tribe. Why is one here? Her and Yabad Boar, and reached for her sword. Kim reminded her, Look, carefully, that's not the demon tribe, it's the aquatic tribe. Huh, John Hay said. Kim explained, Their skin is made of a tough horn-like layer, not scales. Their tail fins are horizontal, not vertical. This is a characteristic of dolphins. This member of the aquatic tribe had a human torso, a blue lower body that was a fishtail, and a dorsal fin. Kim said, Pay attention to your surroundings. This is a city of aquatic people, the kind that are marine mammals. As John Hay looked around, she saw a burly walrus person talking with a polar bear person. The two of them, master and disciple, approached a building. John Hay said, I'm a bit overwhelmed. I'm seeing things I never thought I would. Is this the inn we booked, Master? Suddenly, Kim noticed something. He said, You go in first. Yes, John, Hay replied. Kim opened a door, on which a sign read, Staff Only. A royal assassin inside said to Kim, Welcome to Hennetus. What is your purpose for coming? Here, Kim replied, Sightseeing. The royal assassin produced a card and said, In that case, you'll need this. This time, it's ZL, a 31-year-old intermediate knight. Even though it's the lowest rank, it will be more convenient for you to move around with. The identity of a knight. Kim looked at the card and said, A knight, huh? I guess I should change my outfit. So he changed into a suit of armor with a blue cloak. Hennetus is the kingdom's main trading port, Kim thought as he walked. This port city has grown remarkably thanks to mending relationships after the founder of the Gojan Kingdom fell into the water. That's what I heard anyway. He recalled the information he'd read. The port was blockaded due to the appearance of the Zekin. And the reason he came here was the Zekin, a giant squid from legends with a large head, numerous eyes, and countless long tentacles. In a world teeming with monsters like this, it's no surprise that the Zekin exists. Kim licked his lips and thought, There's no way a creature so massive and legendary could be bad. It will surely be useful for my own power. However, it's strange. Kim looked around. He felt that the Zekin was supposed to have appeared here, but the city was far too peaceful. On the contrary, he walked past a restaurant with a grand opening sign. Zekin Commemorative Menu. Kim muttered to himself, Commemorating the Zekin. A waiter inside saw Kim walk in and said, Welcome, esteemed customer. Would you like to order a set? Kim replied, Yes, I saw the banner outside. The waiter said, Yes, it's 5 silver coins per portion. It's a Zeedken set meal. After licking 3 plates clean, the waiter asked Kim, How is it, sir? Since this is a new menu item, we'd love to get your feedback. If you participate in our survey, you'll receive a complimentary drink. Oh, juice or coffee, sir? Kim replied, Oh, just put down very delicious for everything. Before he could finish, the waiter cut him off. Yes, sir, our restaurant has actually partnered with Tonget. Kim said, No, that's not it. I'm looking for Zekan. But the waiter plowed right on saying, The famous restaurant from Santo Canago to provide high-quality service and accumulate points every time a customer visits. Kim closed his eyes in exasperation, listening to the guy ramble on. Our head chef is a famous gourmet and a squid specialist. In our 5 years of operation, we have focused solely on our signature squid dishes. It's worthy of a full 3 Michelin stars. Kim thought to himself, This isn't Zeedkan. Should I just bite this kid's head off? Kim felt it was no exaggeration that this staff member was the most difficult opponent he'd had to deal with so far. It took a solid 30 minutes before he could finally get the information he needed. Beneath the sea, a creature with many tentacles appeared. A voice echoed over the calm surface of the water. A natural disaster, that exists in the deep abyss. A being that is both a shackle of nature and a devourer of life. The winds blew across the sea's surface. A killer whale beastman named Defi was holding a fish, and continued, The colossal destroyer of the vast ocean. Suddenly something surfaced from the sea. Defi introduced it. That is Zen. He tossed the fish towards the massive silhouette. A tentacle shot out and wrapped around the fish. The silhouette of a large, multi-tentacled octopus gradually emerged. It was an small orange octopus with big round eyes, and it was meowing. This is Geppy the octopus. The people on the shore exclaimed in awe, "Whoa, it's so big, so cute, moot." Amid the shouts of awe and cheers, Kim, however, was completely speechless. He muttered to himself, "So Zyken is a tourist attraction now. Besides, it's not as big as I thought. It looks more like a giant kitten." DeFi petted Jeppy and said, "That's right. Good job making it purr happily meow." Kim watched in this whole scene and thought to himself, "I went through all this trouble to see this. I should have just stayed home and slept, huh?" Just then, Kim saw a boat speeding towards them from a distance. The boat drew closer, stopping just a short way from Geppy and causing it to cry out, "Meow!" On the boat were the silhouettes of several people. They leaped from the boat and landed ashore. It was a lion beastman and his lackeys. The lion beastman let out a theatrical sigh and shouted, "I am an adventurer from a distant land, O ye beasts." The lion beastman bellowed, "This time I want to hear your answer." The lion beastman and his gang glared toward DeFi and Jeppy. The crowd whispered, "What's going on? What's the deal with that adventurer leader?" DeFi casually cleaned his ear and said, "So noisy, can't you be quiet for a moment?" The lion beastman retorted, "We came to hear an answer. Stop the useless chatter and give it to me. What do you intend to do?" The lion beastman's eyes flashed as he looked at Geppy. The octopus broke out in a sweat and whimpered, "Meow." DeFi said, "No, I've already told you I'm not interested. Why do you keep bothering me?" The lion beastman said, "We're clearly not on the same page. That's not the answer we want." DeFi replied, "You only hear what you want to hear. You never intended to talk from the beginning, did you? Why even bother pretending?" The lion beastman drew the sword from his back and said, "You're right. If words won't work, we'll settle this with force." DeFi cursed, "You're insane." The lion beastman pointed his sword at DeFi and ordered, "Everyone prepare for battle." DeFi looked bewildered. "My ears are working just fine, so why is this happening? A fight is no big deal, but it's always better to be careful." Suddenly, DeFi's expression darkened. A spear thudded into the boat, and a voice called out, "If you want this ship to stay in one piece, then let's talk. Or should we just dismantle this boat right now?" Captain." At that moment, 4 seal beastmen appeared, having already subdued everyone on the boat. The lion beastman stammered, "Since when? Good grief." DeFi scolded, "Land-dwelling animals sailing a ship to invade our waters. What a bunch of crazies. Since you're already here, you should go straight to the hospital for a checkup. You've got guts," he said. The lion beastman replied, "You swimming pig, I won't forget this humiliation." And they all shouted, "Just you wait, you bunch of swimming pigs," and steered the boat away. DeFi watched them go and said, "See, total nuisances." He took another fish from a bucket while saying, "Sorry about that happening during your lunch, Geppy." Jeppy's eyes widened and it meowed as the fish flew towards Sit. Suddenly it panicked and meowed as it missed the fish. Kim reached out and casually caught it. He took a bite and said, "This is really fresh." This surprised DeFi, who blurted out, "Huh." While chewing, Kim said, "I have something to ask. Do you have a minute?" The scene shifts to the seaport with its azure waters and anchored ships. The Zcan Experience Tour had ended rather quickly. Kim had followed, and the group of killer whale beastmen. DeFi sat on the pier and called to Kim, "Over here." Kim looked around and said, "This is your office. How unique." DeFi asked, "So what did you want to ask?" Kim said, Earlier the lion beastman said he wanted to hear an answer. What did he mean by that?" DeFi replied, "Oh, that you saw Geppy, right." Kim asked, "Geppy?" DeFi responded, "He's the giant octopus from earlier." Kim recalled its huge sparkling eyes. "Ah," he uttered. DeFi said, "Those adventurers want to kill that cute little guy. A few months ago, when the demon race launched a large-scale attack on the royal palace, the demon king's navy encountered Zen while attacking Hinny Tao. At that time, Zen appeared near the city right alongside the demon king's navy ships. After the demon king died, they immediately retreated. Luckily, the city was left safe and sound. Afterwards, while they were destroying the eggs that Zergel had left behind, PI dove into the ocean and discovered a clutch of eggs. One of them hatched into a tiny orange octopus. From that moment on, it thought I was its parent and has been with me ever since. Garp was just as adorable back then as he is now," P grumbled. "Those adventurers went after Garp, claiming he was some dangerous monster. But I'm sure they were after something else." Kim recalled what High Panic had told him. "Doesn't the Beastmen Federation advocate for a unified community for all Beastmen? They claim to be non-discriminatory and to recognize the freedom of all their members, just like humans and elves do." He thought to himself, "That's the official story High Panic told me about the Beastmen." Then Pi continued, "Those Beastmen on the mainland are no brothers of ours. The Beastmen Federation was established 50 years ago at most, and even now, those land dwellers still abuse and discriminate against marine beastmen like us. We're going to defeat them, take their place in Hendi T, and become true members of the Gigian Continent Kingdom. Then Hendi T will become the largest trading port in the entire kingdom. Only then can we truly say that all beastmen are welcome." It started 50 years ago when those land dwellers began sending envoys to my ancestors. P trembled at the memory from 50 years. ago when a lion beast man asked an orca beast man, so why won't you just come back to the kingdom? The orca beastman shot back, you want me to come back now after I finally made a place for myself, as if we don't know. What you're really after is this trading port, you shameless dogs. The lion beastman rolled up his sleeves. If that's how you want it, then I have no choice but to use force. Men teach him a lesson. But suddenly the orca beastman grabbed the lion by his collar. The lion yelled, whoa! Hey, wait, hold on. But the orca beastman just slammed him to the ground. The lion lost a few teeth and was left completely stunned. P continued. After that, they started using their adventurer status to harass us. And they have all the commanders at the Santo Anomia branch under their thumb. That guy from before, he's a descendant of that same lion from the Federation. It's been 50 years and it's still terrifying. Kim put it together. The Beastman from earlier was the descendant of that envoy from 50 years back. The same lion envoy. Pai E then said, so that's the whole story. Does that answer all your questions? Intermediate Knight of Clavis. Kim was taken aback. No wonder you were so willing to talk, he said. What do you want? P smiled. I'm glad. You're a quick study. In that case, let's get right down to business. Kim countered. By all means. And what? Are you offering me? As the ship sailed in and out of the harbor, Kim took his leave. P broke into a cold sweat watching him go. He collapsed onto the ground. His underlings rushed to his side. Captain, are you all right? P.I. shakily got to his feet. That night, a Seal Beastman spoke up. Understood. We'll have someone tail him immediately. But Pi snapped back. No, don't you dare follow him. I had the same thought, but forget it. If anyone is stupid enough to even suggest assassinating him, you will deal with that. Person on the spot. He's no intermediate knight. He's a monster. P remembered the immense magical power that was just radiating off Kim's back. The harbor, Joan Hen was clutching her stomach. Ugh, my stomach is killing me. My master's palate is so different from mine, every meal is flavorless. Now where has he run? Off to this time. Suddenly a voice called out, excuse me, are you? Knight Seong. Joan Hen turned to see who it was. I am. Can I help you? Standing before her was a red-haired nun. The nun grabbed Joan Hen's hands and exclaimed, it really is you, Knight Seong. I can't believe I ran into you here. The goddess must be smiling down on me. She threw back her hood, revealing a pair of cat ears. Knight Seong, we have a huge problem. There's a war weapon from the demon race hidden somewhere in this city. She said, her voice filled with panic. She grabbed Joan Hen's arm. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. A cursed weapon left by the demon army is hidden here. Joan Hen replied calmly, slow. Down, miss. Let's find somewhere quiet to talk. In a nearby restaurant, a delicious-looking squid-shaped omelet over noodles sat on their table. Here's the Zen special that you ordered. Enjoy, the waiter said. Joan Hen eyed the food. Zen, she thought then, asked, is the weapon you mentioned related to this? The cat girl replied between bites. That's right. The monster Zergle is on the loose out there. I really thought that peace was finally returning, but now we have this to deal with. Joan Hen thought to herself, the master said he came here because of Zergle, so it has to be nearby, but this city feels so peaceful. They even have a Zergle-themed specialty dish. Joan Hen then asked, did you report this to the church? There's a branch here, isn't there? The cat girl nodded. Yes. But the more I tried to explain, the less they believed me. Joan Hen's eyes narrowed. The church is ignoring a report from one of its own missionaries. She suddenly put 2 and 2 together. The cat girl asked, is something wrong? Why aren't you eating? Joan Hen quickly replied, oh, no. It's nothing. Hey, miss, look over there. Joan Hen pointed behind her. The cat girl went, and spun around. A swift chop landed. The cat girl slumped over out cold. Joan Hen casually hoisted her onto one shoulder, leaving the waiter to call after them. Ma'am, you forgot your drink, ma'am. A sprawling plain stretched out before a fortified city. As Kim made his way across it, he mused, the Jejian Kontin Kingdom shares a border with demon territory. That must be why the symbol knights, the very symbol of the kingdoms, might hold so much sway. How did their organization get so massive? Kim wondered. Knowing this, that killer whale Phi had still tried to recruit him. Kim recalled their chat. Of course, Phi had said it was voluntary, but Kim had already taken the reward for the job. He would get to what that reward was later. For now, let's talk about his cheetah form. While the cheetah is the fastest animal on land to Kim, it was just a weak and mediocre class. As Kim began to transform, he recalled its main drawback, poor stamina. If he overused the form, his temperature would skyrocket and his flesh would literally start to melt. However, that was a problem for his old self. The armor on his body began to dissolve. In its place, he transformed into a cheetah, enhancing its natural body structure with the incredible stamina from the lungs and blood vessels of a dinosaur. As this thought crossed his mind, Kim planted his new cheetah paws on the grass, which helped his sweat evaporate, faster cooling his body. His legs finished their transformation, and his face shifted into a cheetah's muzzle. On top of that, he increased his acceleration by incorporating the muscles of a hawk and the bone density of a dragon. At last, Kim's transformation into a unique cheetah was complete. He shot across the plains, At the city gate of Santo Anomia, 2 soldiers were standing guard. Suddenly, one of them noticed a blur in the distance. He squinted at the approaching shape and asked, "What in the world is that?" In a flash, Kim leaped clean over the guard's head, landing gracefully on one foot, then instantly shifting back into his human form. The baffled soldier glanced around, asking, "What was that?" So strange. By the time the guards could process anything, Kim was long gone, his thoughts turning back to Phi's instructions. If we play by the local adventurer laws, there's no way we can just walk into the Adventurers Guild. However, if it's for a criminal investigation, that's a whole different story. And you have that authority. As an intermediate knight, all you have to do is accuse the guildmaster of the crime of espionage for an allied nation using these forged documents. After that, those scumbags won't be able to use their influence to run their mouths anymore. Kim had asked, if it's that simple, why not just get someone else? Phi had shaken his head and replied, "There's no one better suited for the job than you right now. After the war with the demons, the assessment test for senior knights and the restructuring of the intermediate knight forces are in complete chaos. And that's precisely the reason the intermediate knights are being sent to Hinedi Tau." Kim knew he couldn't pass up this golden opportunity, especially when the Adventurers Guild was in turmoil after the death of its leader, Giulio Aventurera. So he had replied, "I'll take the mission, but on my own terms." Meanwhile, at the Santo Anomia branch of the Adventurers Guild, a lion beastman seethed. That killer whale Phi, that blasted sea dog, he slammed his fist on the table in a rage. A nearby tiger beastman advised, "Please calm down. A scoundrel like him will get what's coming to him eventually." He had no idea someone was standing directly behind him. A blade suddenly erupted from his chest, and the tiger beastman let out a final choked gasp. The lion beastman barely had time to shout, "Who's there?" before a hand clamped around his neck, lifting him high into the air. He stammered, "Spare me," before being thrown violently to the ground. Kim reached for his neck and blood sprayed. A small smile played on Kim's lips as he looked at the object now in his hand. He then leaped from the room just as a huge explosion went off. Below, guild members formed a water brigade and shouted, "Fire! There's a fire! It's coming from the guildmaster's office! Put it out!" By the time the blaze was extinguished, the room was a charred ruin. A crowd gathered, staring at the blackened corpse on the floor. Lying next to it was a small blue orb. They whispered, "The guildmaster. Who could have done this?" Kim stepped forward from the crowd and announced, "This appears to be a murder. I will be conducting the investigation." Someone scoffed, "And who do you think you are, saying you'll investigate?" Kim replied coolly, "I am intermediate knight, Jack Chaldeer." A ripple of murmurs went through the onlookers. An intermediate knight. What is he doing here? Kim walked over to the body. He touched the blue orb, and it began to emit a voice. This is the people," whispered Ike. "That sound is coming from a recording device." Kim picked it up, and another voice played. "What are you doing? This is an order. From him. You have served your purpose. We don't need you anymore." "What? No, it can't be. Do you have any idea how much work I put into..." "Ugh." The crowd gasped. "That's the guildmaster's voice and his assistant's," Kim announced. "This is irrefutable proof. Therefore, this case will not require any further investigation." He thought to himself, "It helps that I used their actual throats to perfectly mimic their voices." He placed a hand on the rug and said, "Furthermore, there's something here." He thought, "I coated this with a layer of salamander slime to make it fireproof." From underneath the rug, he pulled out a stack of documents. The crowd reacted. "It's a folder full of papers. Documents about tax evasion. Was the guildmaster a spy?" Kim thought, and finally, that establishes the motive for the murder. Coincidentally, the informant, the lion beastman, is now conveniently dead. Perfect. At that very moment, a cat beast woman slowly blinked her eyes open, murmuring, "What happened? Where am I?" She realized she was sitting in a large round tub and was tied up. The cat beast woman groaned, blinking again as she looked around. "Where am I?" she repeated. At this moment, she was bound hand and foot. A man's voice said, "Ah, you're awake." The cat beast woman looked up and asked, "A holy knight, why are you..." It was John Hendot Model. Pulling out an iron rod, he said, "I checked with the church, and they told me a missionary like you has never been here. So I searched your belongings and found this." John Hen threw down a card. The cat beast woman cried out, "My Adventurers Guild card." Joan Heng twirled the sharp-tipped iron rod in her hand and continued, "Love your neighbor and love your enemies as if they were your neighbors. If someone slaps you on one cheek, offer them the other. Forgive those who have wronged you, time and again. However, never forget those with treachery in their hearts. This is the secret decree the Pope himself has entrusted to us." I don't know what you're thinking or what your motives are, but I'm sure you'll tell me sooner or later. Anyway, Joan Heng brandished the sharp awl and stepped toward the cat beastman, who cried out, "Wait, Crusader, please listen to me." What followed was a long scream as a spray of ketchup splattered across the wall. Meanwhile, at the E1 Daily Mattel Fenza, the head reporter for the Anomia branch was drafting an investigative report on a recent case. This is the testimony from Ya, an intermediate knight and an investigator for Anomiya regarding the assassination of the Adventurers Guild Master. Musing aloud, he dipped his pen in ink. The official story is that the case is closed. The Guildmaster was a spy for the Alliance of Demi-Human Nations. He apparently mismanaged sensitive information, so he was eliminated to keep him quiet. The perpetrator is believed to be his assistant, who is currently missing. However, if that's really the case, there are too many contradictions. The killer's goal was supposedly to silence him, yet they left incriminating evidence all over the place. He scribbled furiously. What's more, part of the Guildmaster's body is still missing. And on top of that, there are glass shards from a window that was clearly broken from the outside. There are just too many suspicious details. He was so engrossed in his work that he never noticed the shadowy figure looming up behind him. The Royal. Assassin slowly reached out as Mattel continued to write. The station unit may have closed the case after their investigation, but I will expose the truth behind this incident. I swear it on my name as a journalist. Just outside the building, the Royal Assassin was speaking with Kim. I don't get it. Julio Adventuraria knew that foreign spies had infiltrated his organization, so why would he try to cover it up? Kim replied, because to him, the guild was more important than the country. The Royal Assassin noted, you sound pretty sure of yourself. Is there something else you know? Kim answered, no, I only know what you do. He thought back to Julio. He was just like me, abandoning his own morals and conscience to achieve his goal. In his case, he must have put the guild's growth ahead of national security. Kim then asked, still I don't understand. Why would someone dedicate so much time and resources to such a mediocre place? The Royal Assassin replied, I see. In any case, I'll report this to His Highness. I've also silenced the reporter who was about to leak a rather explosive rumor. He thought of Mattel. Kim said, got it. Thanks to you, I won't have to deal with that nuisance anymore. The Royal Assassin added, very well then. Until next time. After he left, Kim stood there for a moment. Well, everything's taken care of here. I should head back too. He took off, transforming into a cheetah again and racing across the plains. As he ran, he reflected, after devouring that tiger beastman, my understanding of feline traits has deepened. The werewolf I consumed last time was from the canine family, so the only thing it contributed to my cheetah form was the instinct for running on all fours. Suddenly, he skidded to a halt. Wait a minute. In the next instant, he tripped over his own paws, tumbling head over heels across the grass, before crashing into a large boulder, sending a crack up its surface. Kim groaned, thinking, the first creature I ate that was even close to a demi-human was a werewolf, the lowest class of demon born from a mutated human. A demi-human is a completely different type of life form, whereas werewolves are technically classified as demons, yet their abilities and power stem from the same source. This means werewolves have a natural compatibility with canine creatures. Werewolves don't wear clothes while tiger beastmen wear clothes like humans. And tiger beastmen are compatible with creatures from the feline family. They both represent a perfect fusion of their two natures. Other demons aren't like that at all. Kim thought back on all the demon forms he knew. If I had to make a comparison, merfolk are like bananas and insectoids are like geraniums. A banana is golden yellow, fragrant and delicious, while a geranium is bright red and beautiful. They're both plants, but they're completely different. On the other hand, a werewolf is like a hot pepper, and a beastman is a bell pepper. They are both large and round and hollow inside like a demon's maw. If you cut them open, they look pretty similar. So what exactly is the difference between a demon and a beastman? Shaking the rock fragments off himself, Kim concluded, all right, I guess I have no choice but to eat more of them and find out. He started running again. Soon he was in front of an inn room in Henny de Tao. He'd arrived. Pushing open the door, he saw Joan Heng turn around. She was covered in what looked like blood. Oh, master, you're back. Kim nodded. Yeah, his eyes fixed on the red stains. Joan Heng simply pushed open the bathroom door. Inside, the cat beastman was groaning, the ketchup, save me. She, too, was covered in ketchup with the sharp awl resting harmlessly on her shoulder. Joan Heng explained, she's an adventurer who was disguised as a missionary. She tried to get close to me to use the church's authority to get rid of Zcal. If this were the old me, I wouldn't have been able to control my strength and would have sent her to meet her ancestors. But thanks to your teachings, Master, I managed to hold back. So after I subdued her without anyone getting seriously hurt, I just continued with the interrogation. I'm doing great, right, Master? Not long after, in the east, deep in a forest with no clear way out, a small campfire flickered. Kim sat by the flames thinking to himself, I'm usually pretty laid back with my work, but this time I really had to hustle. Just then, John Hyun appeared, carrying firewood in one hand and her catch in the other, and said, Master, I've gathered some more wood. Meanwhile, Kim couldn't help but think, and it's all thanks to this goofball. He started recalling his conversation with Dai-Fi the Knight. Look, I know I owe you one, Kim had said, but isn't this going a little too far, knocking out and kidnapping someone in broad daylight, then grilling them in a hotel room that isn't even soundproof? And let's not forget, they're a member of the Powerful Adventurers Guild. Kim had replied, "My bad. How long until this whole thing blows over?" DeFi sighed. "Unfortunately, you're probably looking at about 6 months for people to forget. This incident really stirred the pot, you see. From my end, I'll drag out the investigation for as long as I can. So you need to get out of here fast." Back in the present, sitting by the fire, Kim mused, "Who would have thought we'd end up being hunted like this? On the bright side, I should probably check my payment for this job." Kim reached for the pouch at his hip. He took something out of it. A giant sea snake, a true ocean serpent. A large blue snake was pulled from the pouch by Kim. Kim looked at the snake, as its mouth hung open, its tongue flicking in and out, and thought, "I figured I'd have to spend weeks at sea to find one of these. But lucky for me, this mission came up." He took a big bite. While chewing, he mumbled to himself, "The meat's pretty tough, and I'm guessing it's poisonous too. Although sea snakes can't normally grow to this giant size, it's still worth eating. A snake this big is going to be incredibly useful, especially since I don't have a swimming ability." John Hyun piped up, "Master, I was just wondering, why don't you ever eat cooked food? It seems like you only ever eat things raw." Kim glanced at the meal grilling over the fire and explained, "Cooking takes time and the smoke makes it easy for us to be tracked. And since my stomach can handle anything, there's really no need." John Hyun replied, "I guess you don't really care much about the taste then." But Kim's real reason was a secret. Actually, it's because cooked food makes it harder to absorb abilities. Just 5 minutes later, John Hyun was already snoring. Kim, still chewing, glanced over at the sleeping John Hyun and thought, "She conked out right after eating. So simple-minded," he mused, then swallowed. Suddenly, Kim's ears perked up. He looked towards an approaching figure and called out, "Who's there?" A royal assassin stepped into the light and said, "It's me." Kim looked surprised. "Why are you here? I thought we were supposed to meet after I got out of the forest." The royal assassin replied, "The situation has changed. An elf has shown up in this forest. Not too far away, the wreckage of a carriage lay tangled in thick vines. A silver-haired elf, clad in blue armor, was making their way through the undergrowth, their eyes glowing with a faint green light. Elves, of course, are those creatures with the signature silver hair and pointed ears who inhabit these forests. The elves on the Elmod continent have all the classic traits that you'd expect to see. However, their long lifespans and natural talent for magic mean they can control it with ease, which unfortunately tends to make them incredibly arrogant with sky-high pride. This is probably why Kim has a saying, 'The only good elf is a dead elf.'" The royal assassin replied, "That may be, but the real problem is this elf's identity. And trust me, there's no way this one is a good elf in any sense of the word." "Their identity?" Kim asked. The royal assassin explained, "They're one of the candidates to become the next elven king." Kim processed this. "So in short, we're talking about a major figure, someone with a rank, like a prince or princess." Kim's mind flashed back to something he'd heard at the temple. "If the heads of the kings of the 4 races are offered on the underground altar of the state religion, the door to a new world will open." Kim thought to himself, "Well, clearly, the elves are one of those 4 races. I wonder what happens to those useful heads afterward." Turning back to the assassin, Kim asked, "So why did this noble candidate for the throne come all the way to this forest?" The royal assassin replied, "Whatever their reasons, they're probably after the Hydra, a monstrous 3-headed snake." At that very moment, the elven prince Dudon was pushing deeper into the forest with his attendant. He thought, "The farther we go into the forest, the thicker this poisonous gas gets." He pressed onward. His attendant pleaded, "Prince Dudan, I beg you to reconsider going alone. To slay the Hydra is far too dangerous. Once the surrounding creatures are affected by its poison, they become incredibly ferocious, and their attack patterns change drastically." He pictured the 3-headed beast and continued to warn, "Its original combat abilities are already formidable. In the last 100 years, only a single person has ever successfully defeated a Hydra. That was the party, led by Julio Aventa, and every single member died, except for the leader himself." But Dudon gritted his teeth and snapped at his attendant. "Why do you keep repeating things I'm already perfectly aware of? It's like you're a broken record, programmed by someone." The servant insisted, "It is that dangerous, my prince." Dudon shot back, "It seems you still don't grasp the gravity of the situation." "That's not true," the servant protested. "I'm saying this precisely because I know," Dudon scoffed. "Fine, let's say I give up and go back right now. Then what happens?" The servant stammered, "Well, as someone in line to inherit the throne, just like her highness." "Elam and his highness Leysut," Dudon cut him off sharply. "Don't even mention them. Leysut is a worthy heir because he possesses the incredibly rare time attribute magic, and Elam has already achieved several outstanding diplomatic victories. And she's only 200 years old, and me. What do I have besides our shared bloodline? Nothing. I share the same blood as those two, but while I don't know who will eventually become king, it's painfully obvious who won't." The servant began, "Even so, this is just too reckless. We should turn back." Uzerin said. I've been using my mana constantly, and I'm at my limit. But if we go back empty-handed, we'll be branded as failures, his servant argued. Please grow up. You haven't succeeded a single time in your whole life. It's just your fate. Uzerin shot the servant a silent glance before replying. You're right, I get it. The servant sighed. Finally, you understand, don't you? With a cold expression, Uzerin said, I understand that you have no intention of sticking with me. He then cast a spell on the servant. Water instantly surged around his feet. The servant stammered, Prince. At the same time, countless thorny vines shot out, wrapping tightly around his 2 arms and 2 legs. Wait, Prince, this isn't funny, the servant cried out. Uzerin simply turned his back and said, You said some things I couldn't just laugh off either, didn't you? The servant shouted, Prince, please! Wait. Just then, a thorny vine burst from his mouth, silencing him completely. All he could manage were muffled sounds. Elsewhere in the forest, Kim and Jophiel were making their way through the dark woods. Kim, reading a book about hydras, commented, It's not just animals that turn violent from a hydra's poison. Plants do too. They will swing their branches, which become as hard as iron, to hunt their prey. But if these plants can't absorb any water, they'll stop moving. So if it's a water attribute magic user, they can drain the water to create a safe zone. Kim closed the book and added, Because of this very issue, I was planning to just fly over everything. Jophiel looked at the surrounding trees and noted, But the plants aren't attacking us. Kim replied, That's right. In fact, it looks like they're actually making a path for us. Kim placed 2 fingers on a nearby thorny vine and asked, Where? He listened intently for a moment. There's an intruder on the other side of the forest, Kim said. Jophiel asked, Master, are you talking to the trees? It's less like talking and more like sensing their thoughts, Kim explained. He pulled his hand away, thinking, plants with this kind of toxicity share a strong collective consciousness, and I happen to have the ability to tap into the powers of conscious beings. Jophiel commented, That sounds way too complicated. Kim glanced at the black worms wriggling in his palm, thinking, They're even more ravenous than Feros at any moment. They'll latch on to you like an octopus. He looked out of the forest and continued his thought. In any case, these trees seem to have a wavelength similar to the frequency of the magnetic field I use for parasite control. I wonder if that's why I'm able to perceive their intentions. Kim began to hear and feel what the trees were seeing. Danger, pointy ears, magic, tree roots. Drought over there, thinking. In his mind, Kim saw Uzerin, the water rising around the servant's feet and the thorny vine sprouting from his mouth. Kim started to piece it all together. Okay, so there's an intruder over there. Pointy ears is drying out our roots with magic. We need help. Pointy ears must be an elf, and magic that dries out roots has to be water attribute magic. Just like the information said, it must be Prince Uzerin of the Elf Kingdom. So how should I go about approaching him? At that very moment, Jophiel was busy writing something behind Kim with great passion. Her journal read, The Heroes. War Chronicle of Sir Kim. Even the very plants, tainted by the Hydra's cursed poison, were moved by the heroic aura of Sir Kim, and they gladly parted to show him the way. Not far from them, Uzerin was also navigating through the thorny vines. He thought about his 2 younger siblings and mused, My life has just been one failure after another. Among the elves of the strongest, bloodline and elf of incredible power was born. Uzerin was that elf blessed with an outstanding talent for water attribute magic. He was the crown prince who could command the very water itself. But after Uzerin's twin siblings were born, his entire life went straight down the drain. His crown effectively fell and shattered. His younger brother, Lesuth, was an elf with an incredibly rare talent, time attribute magic. He could control the flow of time around him. Meanwhile, his younger sister Elim could resolve any danger facing the kingdom with her special presence alone. She was a brilliant little girl. Compared to them, Uzerin's own abilities and achievements felt like nothing. He had absolutely nothing. His crown was already broken. Uzerin thought back to his servant and mused, The only thing I have is a talentless flatterer. Suddenly, thorny vines snaked around his leg. Uzerin was yanked into the water. Soaking wet, he sat on the ground and thought, even in a situation like this, I'm still thinking about all that. I tried to accomplish something by defeating the Hydra to finally get some recognition, but my mana is completely depleted. It must be because I was constantly maintaining my water attribute magic. I've hit my limit. The thorny vines began reaching for him. Uzerin dug his fingers into the dirt and said, My whole life has been drowned in inferiority. To escape that, I came all the way out here, and in the end, this is all I amount to. Uzerin stared at the mass of vines closing in on him. He recalled his servant's words, Please, grow up, Prince. Aren't we used to failure by now? If you've never won a single time in your whole life, then that's just your fate. Those words were what finally broke him. Thorny vines wrapped around his legs and arms, and Uzerin thought, instead of struggling for a few more hours, isn't it better to just lie here and accept death? In this situation, the thought of survival never even crossed my mind. Uzerin shed a tear as the moon shone down on him. as he lay tightly bound by the thorny vines. Suddenly a figure appeared, landing in front of Yuzern and slashing. The vine is cut, freeing him. A man asks if he needs a hand. Dudan looks up at him and asks, "Who are you?" Standing before him is Prince Panic, who is reviewing a draft bill to reduce the government's subsidy for adventurers, and a proposal to amend adventurer law. The prince slams his seal down hard on the document, looking furious. He glares at the draft, wondering why the foolish nobles aren't applying stronger sanctions and resisting. However, he also considers it carefully. If they did that, it could lead to a cornered dog-will-bite situation. If powerful adventurers were to rebel, it would be a massive headache. With a sigh, the prince thinks he'll have to slowly shackle them all. Truly idiots. At that moment, the prince's attendant enters, carrying a cup of tea for him. High Panic leisurely sips the tea and says softly, "All right, you've worked hard," and casually asks how the work is going. The attendant reports, "Sir Kim has made contact with Prince Dudan, just as you predicted. He was wearing the kingdom's knight armor." Hearing this news, High Panic feels a wave of relief. The attendant hesitantly asks, "If Prince Dudan really manages to stop the Hydra, do you think he could become the next king of the elves?" The answer is a hard no. High Panic believes that no matter the outcome, he cannot become king. Not just a Hydra, even if he caught a dragon, he couldn't become king. The prince thinks that if Dudan develops a favorable impression of their kingdom, it will be helpful in many ways, which leaves the attendant a bit confused. Explains, although the political groundwork has been laid, survival is paramount. Thinking of this, High Panic breaks out in a cold sweat. The prince knows that if the plan fails, he will be torn to shreds by that monster. Back in the deep forest at this moment, Prince Dudan is kneeling at Kim's feet, his legs tangled in poisonous plants. Kim holds out his hand. He doesn't need to say a word, and the plants release the prince's legs and withdraw. Prince Dudan is extremely surprised, thinking to himself, he can control the Hydra's poison plants. Once Prince Dudan is standing straight, Kim introduces himself. "I am Knight Kim of the Gurgian Canteen Kingdom." He doesn't forget to ask, "Are you injured?" Prince Dudan bows his head slightly and says, "I'm still alive. I'm grateful to you for saving me." Kim is a little taken aback and asks again, "Are you really an elf?" This makes Prince Dudan wonder, why would he doubt that? Kim explains, "It's nothing, I'm just surprised because you're different from what I've heard about elves. I've heard that elves are a race that looks down on all other races." Kim knows a fair bit about this race. Their lifespan is 1,000 years, much longer than other races. To them, other races must seem like a bunch of children. Furthermore, if they don't take pride in their outstanding magical talent from birth, then they're just a corpse, not an elf. An elf like that would never express gratitude to another race. Hearing this, Prince Dudan understands and laughs out loud. The prince thinks, I'm no different from the elves he's talking about. If you're compared to others for 200 years, your pride will eventually run out. That's what I've become. But the prince doesn't explain this to Kim. He just says briefly, I know everything you've heard about my people, but I'm different from them. My other kinsmen are exactly as you've described. Not only that, some are much worse than what you've heard. As he says this, Jeon-hen suddenly comes running over in a panic, calling out, Master! She worriedly asks, where did you suddenly go? But before she can finish her sentence, she is grabbed by the poisonous plants of vine wrapping around her mouth. The plants gradually bind her arms and legs, immobilizing her. Seeing this, Kim thinks to himself, what are you doing? You idiot. He gently flicks his hand, controlling the plants with just his thoughts and ordering them to release her immediately. The plants let go of Jeon-hen, retracting their vines and disappearing, causing her to collapse to the ground, scared out of her wits and thinking she was a goner. Just then she sees Prince Dudan standing right in front of her. She can tell he is an elf. She gets up and says cautiously, It's a pleasure to meet you. I am Jeon H. Pitt, a holy knight of the Theocracy. And who might you be? Prince Dudan once again bows his head politely and introduces himself. I am Dudan of the Peo family. It's a pleasure to meet you. Jeon-hen asks in surprise, the Prince of the Elf Kingdom, what are you doing here? Prince Dudan remains polite, placing a hand on his chest and wishing to express once more, Knight of the Gurgian Canteen Kingdom and Holy Knight of the Theocracy, if it weren't for your help, I would have died. Here. Just like Kim earlier, Jeon-hen can't help but be surprised. She thinks to herself, this guy's and elves aren't supposed to be like this. Moreover, a prince being this courteous. I've had too one-sided a view of elves until now. With the introductions over, Prince Dudan continues, By the way, since you both saved me, could I ask you for one more favor? Please help me defeat the Hydra. This request leaves Jeon-hen speechless. She silently judges him. He has no shame at all, as expected of an elf. Faced with this request, Kim calmly steps forward and says, What a coincidence. I was also looking for someone to help me defeat the Hydra. Then he asks, Could you explain your special abilities to me? Not exactly, Prince Yu-juin clarified. I use water attribute magic. It's better suited for support defense and manipulating terrain than for direct defense. It's particularly effective against aquatic creatures like the Hydra. What about you two Kim kept his answer brief. Monstrous strength and transformation. Then he shifted his hand into that of a green monster, with sharp black claws to show what he meant. Prince Yujoin looked a little concerned and asked, I know you have. A transformation ability so powerful, you can even become a dragon, but the Hydra dominates underwater. Won't that be a disadvantage for you? Kim mentioned he could also turn into a sea serpent and was immune to poison. The prince considered this nervously. But sea serpents are saltwater creatures in fresh water unless I can turn this water into salt water. Kim was on board, agreeing to handle the direct attacks. And just like that, they had a plan. This felt much better than being forced to team up. John Hain, not wanting to be left out quickly, asked, Master, what about me? Kim already had a role in mind for her. He replied, Of course, you have a very important job to do, and that is to handle the minions. With their roles, decided they headed straight for the Hydra's lair, with John Hain trailing behind. As she watched them walk ahead, she thought to herself, this isn't quite how the hero stories go. There should be something more dramatic. She clenched her fists, a little disappointed. Like, for example, Knight Kim sacrificing himself to protect his master, the very prince he swore an oath to, and then the prince returning to avenge his fallen knight. As this scene played out in her head, she glanced back at the two guys ahead of her and shook her head. Yeah, nothing like that's happening here. Lost in thought, she hadn't noticed they'd already arrived at the Hydra's lair. Before them was a massive lake with turbulent, churning waves, which formed a large, deep, and dark whirlpool right in the center. Let's get started, Kim said, then turned to Prince Yujoin. How long do you need to prepare? The question left the prince a little confused. Kim clarified, just the standard prep work. The prince nodded in understanding and began to focus his energy into his hands. He then raised them to the sky and silently chanted, Gup Mo Kaja, praise the valor of El Pitu, loose. The prince's eyes began to glow, and shimmering magic circles appeared in the night sky, making even Kim's jaw drop. In an instant, the murky black water of the lake started to transform. The darkness sank to the bottom, leaving the water crystal clear, and this transformation didn't go unnoticed by the Hydra. The colossal three-headed serpent burst from the water, much to everyone's shock. It let out an earth-shattering roar, the eyes on all three of its heads blazing with menace. Just then the minions showed up. They were ferocious-looking forest bears and wolves. John Hain was the first to spot them, yelling, Master, I'll take care of the monsters out here. But both Kim and Prince Yujoin had already vanished. A powerful gust of wind swept towards the Hydra, leaving the monster slightly confused and unsure of what was happening. Suddenly, one of its serpent heads was sliced clean off, splashing into the water below. The attacker was none other than Kim, who had transformed into a dragon. The dragon then soared into the night sky, its form silhouetted by the full moon. I look so cool right now, the dragon thought to himself. That's one head down. Prince Yujoin witnessed the whole spectacle, his eyes glued to the dragon that Kim had become. He analyzed inwardly. His range of motion is restricted in the water, but those teeth and fangs, they have all the traits of a purebred dragon. A soft-bodied creature like the Hydra can't possibly resist them. The prince broke out in a cold sweat, realizing, so this is his transformation magic. Meanwhile, back in the fight, Kim, still in his dragon form, was studying his opponent after taking off its first serpent head. He decided to aim for the rest of them. But suddenly, from the stump of the severed neck, 2 new serpent heads rapidly sprouted. Seeing this, the dragon grew thoughtful. He finally understood. For every one head he cut off, 2 new ones would grow in its place. Just like in the movies, he mused. Gazing at the 2 new heads bearing their fangs, he wondered, how could a head of complex organ with a brain regenerate that quickly? This regeneration is even faster than a troll's. He then wondered, does this regenerative ability apply to the Hydra's whole body, or is it just limited to its heads? With a new question to answer, the dragon charged straight for the Hydra, again thinking, all right, time to test this theory. The Hydra was ready for him this time. All its serpent heads shrieked, letting out a piercing kiki sound as their eyes glowed with fury. The dragon watched them closely. Taking advantage of his agile body, he weaved past the snapping serpent heads. In the blink of an eye, the dragon sliced off all 4 serpent heads in one clean sweep. The Hydra staggered, but instantly 2 new heads sprouted from each. Severed neck. The dragon kept his focus, observing the Hydra's entire body. He realized that while there seemed to be no limit to its regeneration, the number of parts that can regenerate at once seems to be capped. The heads regenerate way faster than any part below the neck. The body's own regenerative ability seemed to have slowed. The Hydra decided to go on the offensive, its many mouths opening wide to crush the dragon from above. The dragon, however, remained calm, thinking, let's see how long you can keep this up. Moments later, the dragon moved quickly. He dodged the bite, climbing up and coiling around the Hydra's neck. As one snake head plunged into the water, he used the momentum to leap directly upward, finding himself facing countless snake mouths, each bearing sharp fangs ready to eat him alive. At that moment, Kim transformed from a dragon back into a human nimbly weaving between the giant snake heads. Without hesitation, he charged straight into the mouth of the tallest one. One hand gripped his jaw tightly, while the other transformed into the powerful foreleg of a mantis shrimp. He gathered his strength, raised the limb, and slammed it straight down onto the snake's head. The blow was so powerful it tore the head apart, piercing straight through to the snake heads below and severing them all in one go. Kim landed gently on the ground in a pose worthy of a superhero who had just defeated a villain as the heads of the snakes fell scattered around him. The Hydra continued to sprout more heads. At this point, it was impossible to count them all. All the snake heads lunged towards Kim simultaneously, but he stood his ground calmly. To counter their attack, Kim transformed. His fingernails grew into razor-sharp claws. 2 veiny wings sprouted from his back, growing larger, rougher, and turning a sickly green. With every snake head that lunged, he would forcefully grab it and tear it apart. Not a single snake could even land an attack on him. His sharp claws easily severed their heads. He smirked. "Let's see how much longer you can last." The Hydra shrieked and collapsed into the water. All its snake heads were now detached from its body, floating bloated on the water's surface. Kim stood silently in the middle of the battlefield. He thought to himself, from the 3rd head onwards, its body became lighter than the heads, and it couldn't maintain its balance anymore. After the 42nd head appeared, it could no longer regenerate. Just then, a clicking sound from behind caught Kim's attention. It turned out to be Diane Hen. She had also finished off the Hydra's minions. At the same time, Prince Yujon slowly approached, bowed his head to Kim, and said, "I am indebted to you. I will certainly repay this favor. You truly live up to your reputation as the kingdom's top knight." Kim's gaze was sharp and cold. He replied, "Our goals just happened to align. Don't worry about it. I only came here for my own reasons." Hearing this, Prince Yujon didn't press the issue. He said, "If that's the case, then you needn't concern yourself with my intentions either. I will repay this debt in my own way." With that, the prince cast a spell, collecting a few snakeheads and saying, "I'll just take these." Carrying the snakeheads, the prince turned to leave, offering a brief farewell. "Until we meet again, Knight Kim." Dion Hen then spoke up from behind. "This is the first time I've ever seen an elf bow to someone." Kim agreed. "This is only the 2nd time for me as well." Dion Hen added that, as far as she knows, an elf will never bow unless they are baptized at the Church of the Goddess. Kim mused that if the other elves were half as decent as the prince, it would be a vast improvement. After all, he fought alongside us, and his personality isn't half bad. It would be great if he could become the king of the elves. Kim recalled Prince High Panic saying the same thing, but he knew that could never happen. It was then that he noticed the Hydra's 2 minions, the bear and the wolf, had already been defeated by Diane Hen. Dion Hen was ecstatic, her cheeks blushing red as Kim praised her. "Your combat skills are approaching the level of a saintess." She delightedly thanked him, her voice echoing throughout the forest. Meanwhile, Prince Yujon had returned to the elf kingdom. He rode his horse leisurely, carrying 3 snakeheads amidst the cheers of his people, who were celebrating his feat of slaying the Hydra. The prince smiled smugly. "Finally, I'm worthy of being compared to them. Now I will be the next in line to inherit the throne." Suddenly, a dragon's corpse fell from the sky, landing near the prince's feet in the middle of the grand square. The prince was surprised to see everyone gathering around it. The crowd's murmurs suddenly erupted into cheers. "Prince Julius has slain a dragon!" Seeing the crowd cheer for Julius's achievement while completely ignoring his own victory over the Hydra, Prince Yujon gritted his teeth in frustration and muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Back in the forest, Kim and Dion Hen were taking a break. Kim was perched casually in a tree, holding a Hydra head, which also served as his lunch in one hand, and a stack of documents in the other. On the ground below, Dion Hen was helping him gather all the snakeheads. Kim, however, was focused on a stack of news reports about a mountain fortress located in the territory of Marquis Huisque BD. Chewing noisily, he tossed a bag down to Dion, Hen asking her to put all the heads inside. After finishing the entire snakehead, he discovered he could now transform his hand into that of a Hydra. "Let's head up the mountain," he said. Kim pondered. A Hydra's head is a head, but at the same time it isn't. He could see inside it. There were eyes, a nose, and a mouth, but no brain. The bones in the head were connected more like a human arm. The actual brain was in the central part of the skeleton, which explained why its heads could regenerate so quickly. Still, he wondered if chopping off one head would cause 2 to grow in its place. He decided he still needed to study the creature more. In any case, he figured that by eating the Hydra's flesh, he had now obtained its abilities. Not long after, at the mountain fortress in Marquis Bosque BD's territory, 2 soldiers, while a guard was on watch atop a wooden wall, 3 large fireballs suddenly shot across the sky, aiming straight for the mountain fortress, causing a massive explosion. Debris flew everywhere. The guard looked over and saw right in front of the massive blaze the faint silhouette of a muscular monster. The monster advanced straight toward the bandits inside the mountain. The campfire light clearly illuminated the monster's form. Its entire body was pieced together from many types of monsters. Its 2 arms were fire-breathing dragon heads. Its tail was large and long. Its head had sharp horns and sharp spikes, covered its shoulder blades, looking incredibly fearsome. And that was the monster Kim had transformed into. The bandits broke out in a sweat, exclaimed, "A monster!" and fought to turn to flee for their lives. That the monster controlled its arms, preparing to shoot out a blast of fire, and said, "Run! You won't be able to escape anyway." As it finished speaking, it shot a blast of fire at a bandit, incinerating him. A one-eyed bandit, who luckily dodged it, turned pale and mumbled, "Divine punishment. It's divine punishment. That's an emissary sent by the goddess to punish us." The remaining hooded bandit yelled, "Don't talk nonsense. If it were punishment from the goddess, it wouldn't be a monster like that." They kept running, encouraging each other. Just a little further, to the castle's second fence. We'll get help from the others there. However, life is not a fairy tale. When they reached the second fence, they found a large round hole had been made in it. The one-eyed man touched the hole, wondering how such a large breach appeared in the fence. Then he peered inside and witnessed a gruesome battlefield. All his comrades had been sent to the afterlife, their bodies torn limb from limb. Another monster, our very own. John High looked smaller than the previous one, but also possessed sinewy arms, a jaw of sharp teeth, and large eyes, and was casually finishing off their comrades. It turned to the two bandits and smiled. "Ah, more guests have arrived." With that, it slowly advanced towards them. The terrified one-eyed man thought, "I've got goosebumps all over." And then he heard a thud. It turned out the hooded man behind him had drawn his sword and struck his leg. The one-eyed man collapsed in agony, while the hooded man fled, thinking, "I'm sorry, but I have to save my own skin. Please stay alive for a long time and act as decoy." However, he hadn't run for long before he suddenly collided with a muscular figure. He froze, knowing exactly what he had just bumped into. He only managed to exclaim, "Goddess," and those were his last words. The bandit camp was ablaze. John High had herded all the bandits into the flames, leaving no survivors. Once the task was complete, she gleefully went to report to Kim. "Master, it's all finished. We've wiped out all the bandits in this region. The people here can finally live in peace now, right?" And Kim, satisfied, replied, "That's right, you've worked hard." John High's eyes lit up like headlights at the compliment. At that moment, Kim noticed the human arm that John High was holding. He thought to himself, that was unnecessarily brutal. The master was still rather confused, unsure whether he was human or monster. He recalled going through a similar transformation stage himself, but then he pictured John High's recent monstrous form. "A wolf can only wear sheep's clothing for so long," he broke from his train of thought. He said to her, "In any case, it still hasn't shown up, has it?" John High didn't understand his meaning and replied cheerfully, "Oh, if you're talking about the bandits, there are none left. The one just now was the last of them." Kim explained, "No, from the very beginning, our primary target wasn't the bandits. I figured that if all the food in the region vanished, it would appear." A surprised John High asked, "Foodmaster, are you saying the bandits were food? If monsters gather in packs and prey on humans?" Thinking about this, John High began to sweat. Kim calmly stated, "There's only one type of monster that preys on humans." He explained, "Someone recently spotted a manticore in this vicinity." John High asked, "In that case, is this plan really effective? If it sets its sights on the village, the innocent villagers will be in trouble." Kim agreed. "If that's the case, we'll simply get more information from the new witnesses. It just means finding. The manticore will be slightly delayed, that's all. Nothing else changes." John High then offered her own argument. "But what if it has already devoured everyone who saw it? Or what if it only attacked the village that one time and never came back?" This reasoning gave Kim pause. He was about to say something when a voice suddenly cut in, asking, "At that point, were you planning to burn down all the surrounding villages?" The voice emanated from a creature in the shadows behind Kim. Its sudden appearance startled Kim and John High. It continued to speak, asking, "What if you were to stop right here?" and slowly emerged into the light. Now Kim and John High could clearly see the manticore. It was towering. Despite having the face of an old man with a long beard, it possessed a thick lion's mane. Its body was like that of a four-legged beast with sharp claws and possessed the tail of a scorpion. Its eyes glowed with an uncanny light as it continued, "The fire you've started here is insufficient." Facing the monster, Kim remembered a page from a bestiary which stated, "If you encounter a manticore, you must run. That is the only way to survive." The manticore stood there towering over them. The monster was a chimera of several creatures, the head of a man, the body of a lion, and the tail of a scorpion. It was believed that much like dragons or hydras, it was created by the goddess modeled after the creatures of the earth. It was originally a mythological beast. Its favorite food is fresh human flesh. The bandit camp was located in the domain of Marquis Bosque, a place where bandits continuously gathered, making it the perfect location for a manticore to enjoy a lavish feast. Camp, it felt better than anywhere else, but John Hen's scream shattered Kim's peaceful thought. She reached for her sword, but for some reason, she couldn't get a firm grip on it. "What's wrong?" she wondered. It seemed both Kim and the manticore felt the strange sensation too. Kim, however, stayed calm and just looked up at the beast. His first instinct was, the moment I saw the manticore, I immediately wanted to eat it, but I have no desire to destroy it right now. Just then, the manticore spoke up. "Originally, I planned to make those who ruined my hunting ground suffer, but for some reason, seeing you, I don't feel that urge anymore." Kim realized the Manticore was feeling the exact same thing he was. Meanwhile, John Hen was still frozen in place. She thought, some unseen force is holding me back. I don't want to attack it. Her hand, which was gripping her sword hilt, was now slick with sweat. Could this be empathy? The Manticore scraped its claws against the ground and continued, anyway, you have other business to take care of first. Finish that and then come back. As it spoke, the monster backed away slowly, melting into the shadows of the forest. Tomorrow at this same time and place, I'll be waiting for you. With that, the Manticore's form disappeared completely, leaving only the two twinkling lights of its eyes behind in the darkness. The following day, Kim had a meeting with Prince High Panic's attendant in a narrow alley. When he arrived, the attendant politely placed a hand over his heart and apologized to Kim. This was a task we should have handled ourselves. Kim, who was dressed in his full combat gear, simply replied, don't worry about it. I wanted to do it. The attendant went on. In fact, being overly formal would be more disrespectful to you. Thank you for your hard work in the campaign to wipe out the 72 bandit camps in Boskabad. And with that, their conversation was over. Kim headed back to the main road where John Hen was waiting for him. When she saw Kim, she called out happily, Master, you're back. Kim gave her a small smile. Sorry for the wait. Let's get going. And so the pair continued on their journey heading toward the 6th bandit camp in Boskabad. By the time they reached the meeting spot with the Manticore, night had fallen. In the middle of a barren clearing, a lone figure was seated. Even with its back to them, the figure noticed Kim and John Hen as they approached. You're here, it said. Staring at its back, John Hen asked curiously, is that the Manticore? The figure slowly got to its feet, turned around, and replied, yes, that's me. The moment John Hen saw its face, she froze in terror, completely speechless. She tugged on Kim's sleeve. Master, what in the world is going on? Kim was just as confused. What's with your face? The Manticore walked closer, asking calmly, what's the matter? Surprised, I suppose you would be. It grinned. Because this is the face that belongs to you. In the dim light, it was unmistakable. The Manticore had Kim's face. Kim asked quietly, you can copy me too. The Manticore pushed a crude chair made of scrap wood toward Kim. Have a seat first. This is going to take a while to explain. Kim eyed the chair for a moment before deciding to sit down. He crossed his arms and said, all right, start talking. The Manticore began its tale, speaking of the vast universe. In this world, from the very beginning, there was the goddess. When she created this world, she used many species of creatures as a reference, especially creatures from Earth. The various animal and plant species, and even the different races within those species were all created based on them, even monsters from imagination, and those that actually existed. The Manticore paused its story to ask Kim, someone like you would know which monster that is, right? Kim answered quietly, I suppose I do. Hearing this, the Manticore spread its arms wide and declared, very well, then let me properly introduce myself. I am the Manticore. My other name is Test Subject Dupe 5, 3.0, Beta 1 of the goddess's experiments. The name Test Subject instantly rang a bell for Kim. He immediately realized that was his own designation back on Earth. He had once been a wanted man across the globe for a variety of crimes. The Manticore cut through his train of thought, continuing, you are a monster the goddess chose to be recreated in this world, and I am that recreation. Before she began testing the transformation abilities of other creatures, the goddess had first aimed to fuse the bodies of many different species together. That's how the Chimera came to be. However, the goddess's creations after that were all failures. They possessed a mix of abilities from various creatures, much like the Chimera and the Sphinx, and they were able to reproduce. But the original's most crucial ability to eat and replicate could not be duplicated. While the goddess was racking up failures, the Manticore was created in a humanoid form. Its body could only transform into feline creatures, but its head could take the shape of a primate. The Manticore's tail couldn't completely vanish or change into another creature's tail, but it was able to replicate. Show me what it ate, Medan cut in. Wait, I know a mantis is a powerful monster, but this is the first I'm hearing you have an ability like this. The mantis explains, I'm a bit of a special case. The mantises you're familiar with are my descendants. They didn't inherit all of my abilities. Having said that, it lunged straight toward Kim in an attack. Why do you ask? Aren't you the original test subject just like me? Kim calmly replied, you're definitely my son, but the only thing you inherited from me was the genetic data for a human body. As for my abilities, you got none of them. Hearing this, Junhai was taken aback. She stammered, asking Kim, wait, Master, what, your son, Master? You were married. But Kim simply replied, that was a long time ago. Junhai was in utter disbelief, stunned and unable to wrap her head around the fact that her master had been married and even had a son. The Manticore asked, that's all I'm going to say. Any more questions? But Kim just crossed his arms and observed, the timeline doesn't quite add up, does it? He explained, I was born about 30 years ago. This world seems to have been created just over 2 years ago, and yet you, the The manticore didn't need Kim to finish to know exactly what he meant. It confirmed, "That's correct. I have lived here for 1,000 years, but this world was created by the goddess. The world we're talking about isn't just this continent." Its eyes gleamed as it went on. "It's this entire universe. No, it even includes time and space. It's transcendent existence, far beyond what any human could possibly comprehend." Kim pressed on, "Then how do you know all this?" The manticore's answer was, "It isn't just me. The beings made directly by the goddess. The first generation creations all know why the goddess made them. But I'm the only one who survived." Kim was a bit curious. Since the manticore had survived for so long, had it ever met others of its own kind? And the answer, of course, was yes. Beings it called kin existed in the past and still did in the present. The manticore rested its chin on its hand, saying, "However, I don't know where they are now or if they're even alive. For instance, my winged kin could change their bodies into those of reptiles, amphibians, or even mayflies. In their search for more power, they went into the dungeons and haven't been seen since." Kim mused. Reptiles, amphibians, mayflies, snakes, frogs, falling into the dungeons. So that feeling of disgust he had back then was a revulsion for its own kind. Kim still wanted to ask one last question, but the manticore appeared, quite generous, saying, "You can ask more than one, so what is it you wish to know?" A dangerous glint flashed in Kim's eyes as he slowly asked, "To this day, just how many of your own kind have you devoured?" In a flash, a scorpion tail whipped out and struck at Kim, but he managed to throw up a hand to block it. The manticore's eyes now blazed like fire, its scorpion tail fully revealed. It gave a grotesque smile, stretching from ear to ear. Like a marionette, it tilted its head and asked, "How did you know?" The manticore began to transform. Its face darkened as veins bulged across it. It asked triumphantly, "So you know what's coming next, don't you?" Kim signaled for Junhai to fall back. He told the manticore, "I can sense it. Even with your abilities, they aren't perfect. There's an unnaturalness about you. For you to have survived this long by just eating normal food," he continued, starting to gather energy in his hand, "is impossible unless you had a special meal that lets you surpass your own limits." With a burst of speed, he leaped into the air, appearing right behind the manticore. He transformed his hand into a monstrous claw and threw a punch straight at its back, but it dodged just in time, leaping away from his attack. It was still listening intently, knowing he wasn't finished. Kim continued, "And the very moment I saw you, I thought to myself, you look delicious." The manticore chuckled. It calmly got to its feet and said, "I want to make you completely mine. For 1,000 years, that desire has never faded." Its body began to change. Its back grew huge and muscular, and its jaw jutted out, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. It was clearly determined to devour Kim no matter the cost. It spoke, "It's a shame I have to say goodbye to my kinsman, but the joy of approaching perfection will ease my sorrow." Facing the manticore, which had now shown its monstrous true form, Kim was completely unafraid. He asked, "What does your own kind taste like?" The manticore replied with a triumphant grin, "The most exquisite flavor imaginable." It licked its long, sharp, lizard-like tongue over its lips and added, "And you look far more delicious than any kin I've ever eaten." Kim thought to himself, the familiar feeling of kinship, the joy of meeting, the sadness of tragedy, my own anger. None of it can overcome pure instinct. These complex emotions swelled inside him, but in the end, they were all meaningless in the face of instinct. As he thought this, his own body also started to transform. Sharp spikes grew from his shoulders, head, and ears. A lizard's tail and a dragon's arm appeared. He quickly lunged at the manticore, his mouth open wide with hunger, his entire being overflowing with the desire to devour. Kim and the manticore flashed past each other in an instant. But in that moment, they both managed to take a bite out of the other. Kim tore a piece from the manticore's bicep while it ripped off a chunk of his waist. They paused for a moment to savor the taste. Afterward, Kim turned smugly to the manticore and said, "It really is. This good, isn't it? I can see why you'd keep eating them." The manticore, not to be outdone, stared at Kim with its deep, dark eyes and said, "Of all the kin I have ever consumed, none have been more delicious than you. You truly are the original specimen." It shuddered with a fit of ecstatic laughter. "Indeed, a complete and perfect kinsman tastes the absolute best." Bao, as it spoke, one of its arms began to change, morphing into the wing of a bird. It said with satisfaction, "Thanks to you, my power can once again break past its limits." Once again, Kim began to transform. One of his eyes turned pitch black, and within the pupil, a purple light flashed identical to the eye of the manticore. He sneered, "A chicken in a cat's body. It seems you're exhausted, so how about you just stay still and let me eat you?" The manticore thought to itself, "Why am I already feeling full? Have I lost my appetite?" But it still quickly attacked Kim, opening its sharp-toothed maw and shouting, "Now go to sleep. Rest in peace forever." Janhen, who had been watching the battle from a distance, was stunned. Why are they fighting? They're clearly the same kind. Besides, their purpose isn't a life-or-death battle. It's about food. She identified the manticore as a ruthless monster that preys on humans, eating their flesh. It's clearly right for it to be eliminated here. Janhen clenched her fists, confused. But the manticore is the ancestor of all monsters in the world and Master is its prototype. Moreover, Master is not from this world. How am I supposed to report this to the church? John Hen stood rooted to the spot as she watched the two fight all her thoughts. We're lost. A limitless battle between ruthlessness and depravity. It was a savagery that a holy knight should not admire. However, to John Hen, it was the ultimate peak she one day wished to reach. The battle was like a scene from an ancient myth. As a result, the monstrous ego within her grew while her restrained reason and patience were unleashed, growing ever stronger. The sight before her was incredibly captivating, but John Hen had a duty to perform as a holy knight. She was no longer just a human, but a cleric. Out there, the Manticore and Kim were still lunging at and tearing each other apart. The Manticore offered a compliment. This taste, you're not my kind, you're much more delicious. Saying that, it emitted a cloud of gray smoke, enveloping itself and obscuring Kim's vision. Then from within the smoke, several small fish shot out, flying straight at Kim. He quickly raised his tail to block them, and the fish bit directly into it. Kim observed the fish. At first, he thought this was an ability gained from eating the danjanko, but then he changed his mind. This must be an ability from eating pirate's flesh. Kim had realized the Manticore had eaten his flesh and was rapidly evolving. The longer this dragged on, the more dangerous it would become. Another wave of fish attacks rushed forward. Kim opened his mouth, tilted his head back, and spewed a massive stream of fire at the fish. The Manticore wasn't afraid. It even charged straight into the flames, startling Kim slightly. The Manticore landed hard its weight, creating a large crater in the ground while Kim was still flying in the air. He thought, I can't possibly eat the abilities of those guys over there. If that's the case, he decided to attack once more. He dove straight down, his eyes flashing with determination. Kim opened his mouth, thinking to himself, if it has come to this, I guess I could try Diane's method. The Manticore and Kim continued to face off. The Manticore raised its scorpion tail to block the blow, while Kim raised his dragon hand high. He thought, I have to get rid of that annoying tail first. He lunged forward and with one decisive slash, severed the scorpion tail. Kim landed on the ground just as the severed piece of tail fell. The Manticore still showed no sign of pain. He roared again and attacked it. As he came face to face with the Manticore, it grinned at him a frighteningly sinister smile. Kim was startled. It turned out that a fish tail had grown where the scorpion tail had been, and it lunged straight forward, piercing through Kim's abdomen. The attack distracted Kim. Seizing this opportunity, the Manticore used its bird talons to attack Kim. He managed to dodge backward, but his two horns were broken by the Manticore's strike. Kim retreated, grabbing the scorpion tail. Without hesitation, he pulled it out of his body. He held up the scorpion tail as the wound in his abdomen began to heal. He felt no pain and asked the Manticore, are you worthy of my power? Witnessing this, the Manticore said this, flawed body, can you keep it quiet? That's not a very interesting ability. Kim thought to himself, as expected of a creature that has lived for 1,000 years, I'm no match for it when it comes to applying abilities. And at that, he immediately took a bite of the scorpion tail in his hand. The Manticore rushed forward, shouting, no, you have to give that back. It swung its bird talon at Kim's head, but he quickly tilted his head to the side and dodged. This close encounter brought Kim and the Manticore very close, and he immediately used his dragon hand to grip the Manticore's throat tightly. Choking the monster made a sputtering sound. Drool dripped from its mouth. At that moment, the Manticore's tail, which was missing a piece, approached the severed part. They immediately reattached. The Manticore used its tail to attack Kim, forcing him to release its neck. Both of them simultaneously opened their mouths, creating fire within their jaws. They glared at each other, and at the same time, they both shot out beams of fire straight at one another. The two beams collided, creating a massive explosion. By the time the smoke and fire cleared, the Manticore and Kim were still standing firm. Kim was a bit stunned when he saw the tail and asked, you ate it already? The Manticore admitted, it feels like I'm about to die. As expected, the original is very strong. With that, it continued to charge at Kim, threatening, this isn't the end, is it? It used both its newly reattached scorpion tail and its bird talons to attack him. He stood his ground using his hands to block, but he knew his dragon scales couldn't withstand it. So he jumped back, retreating for a moment. However, the Manticore's scorpion tail rapidly grew to a gigantic size. It closed the distance in a flash and sent him flying. Even the Manticore was taken aback, asking, what in the world have you been eating? This is the first time my tail's ever gotten this huge. It was clearly pleased with its new trick. Peering down at Kim, who was lying motionless, it asked, are you still alive? As Kim stared blankly at the sky, he remembered the tail packed the power of a dinosaur. The Manticore slithered closer, murmuring, you're a tough nut to crack, but it's over now. It licked its lips once more, its eyes gleaming as it announced, your body, I will. Savor every last morsel. With that, it thrust its razor-sharp scorpion tail straight for Kim's chest. But strangely, the very moment it touched his chest, the tail came to an abrupt halt. The Manticore was stunned. Kim gloated, losing your steam already. Kim knew the poison was working its way through the Manticore's system. It was poisoned. The creature started struggling to breathe, sweating buckets as it accused Kim, "You coward," fighting with poison. Besides this venom, it isn't from this world. As it turns out, when Kim had bitten the scorpion tail earlier, he had secretly injected it with potent pufferfish venom. Just as he'd gambled, it wasn't a matter of skill. The creature simply had no immunity to a poison from Earth. As the manticore writhed in agony, Kim charged in to attack, retorting, "Calling me a coward. Don't you throw that word around in a battle for humanity's survival." Kim relentlessly clawed at the manticore with his 2 dragon arms. Powerless to defend itself, the creature's monstrous limbs were ripped from its body and sent flying in every direction. Kim asked coldly, "Any last words?" The seemingly defeated manticore replied, "Ah, a last will and testament, you mean?" It had never imagined being the one to give a final statement, as it was always used to hearing them from others. It wondered aloud, "What should I say? I want to leave a nice message for the one who's going to eat me." After a moment's pause, it settled on its last will it would leave. Behind a will specifically designed to make itself taste terrible. Its eyes lit up as it declared, "I am Poe test subject V03.0 beta. The last of my kind I met was P-Shop test, subject V09 CH7 beta, final. He was the test subject closest to version 1.0, and engraved on him was the inscription, final. That was roughly 50 years ago. So it stands to reason that the next version could already be active by now." Its eyes flashed one last time as it uttered, "You're not alone, before finally collapsing. With the fight over, Kim reverted to his human form and went to eat the manticore, but suddenly he paused, thinking, "Why is it so quiet? Normally that kid would be making a huge fuss going on and on about the legend of Sir Kim." He turned to look, but Jay and Hen was nowhere in sight. All he found was a letter left on a chair. He picked it up and began to read. It started, "To my master, master regarding our next kingdom." But just then, a voice from behind stopped him from reading anymore. It was the prince's attendant who was rushing toward him, with a very serious expression announcing, "Sir Kim, we have a huge problem. The adventurers have started a rebellion." Meanwhile, the sun shone brightly over the Georgian Canton Kingdom. Kim was now in Prince Hispanic's office, his mind still preoccupied with thoughts of the manticore. "We were quite similar in many ways. In some aspects, it was even stronger than me. Over thousands of years, it consumed countless more creatures than I did. It could flawlessly utilize the personalities and memories of those it absorbed, meaning it could think and act just like a real person." Kim also recalled that it had a special skill, the ability to exchange its brain with another's while still retaining its own personality. Even when it was operating under another's persona, it could still revert to its original self at any time. Those thousands of years forged the ultimate ability, allowing it to use its powers with incredible flexibility. He looked down at his hand, thinking, by eating it, I've naturally acquired those very same skills, although the knowledge it gathered over 1,000 years seems to have vanished. He closed his eyes, his thoughts drifting to the letter. Jay and Hen had left for him. Prince Hispanic's voice suddenly cut through his thoughts. "Hey there, my friend. Does this mean that you can now completely swap to a new personality?" Kim confirmed this was true, which made Prince Hispanic exclaim in shock. Good heavens. The prince broke out in a cold sweat, thinking he was already a monster, and now that very same monster has become even more terrifying. Shaking it off, the prince got back on topic. "Let's get to the heart of the matter, shall we? I'm sure you know why I've summoned you." Kim sought to confirm, "I believe I heard something about the adventurers causing a bit of a ruckus, is that correct?" And as he spoke, he tilted his head, his voice dropping to a chillingly sinister tone. He asked, "So, where should I start the incineration?" The prince, Hispanic, quickly cut him off. No, why would you jump to that? Of course we have to eliminate them, but now is not the time." The prince explained his plan. "First, we'll use them to take care of the lords who have been a thorn in my side. After they've riled up the populace, we'll have all the justification we need to eliminate them." Kim crossed his arms and replied curtly, "Figured as much." The prince leaned back, looking smug about his own plan, and reminded Kim, "Even so, don't let this drag on. A quick and decisive battle is always preferable. And on that note, hearing about your new ability has given me an idea, my friend. Naturally, a handsome reward will be in it for you." At that very moment, in the Santo Daga region's Adventurers Guild, a man named Mo stood before his fellow adventurers, shouting angrily, "Starting next year, our subsidies are getting cut by 90%. Are we just going to stand by and accept that this is an outrage? We must kidnap a noble to demand that the prince redraft the budget." He raised his fist in the air with determination. "We must fight to take back our rights as adventurers." Among the cheering adventurers below stood the explorer Maiden, but while everyone else was celebrating, he was completely silent. He mused to himself, "So we're heading straight into the royal palace." A glint appeared in Midden's eyes. His chance for revenge was finally here. This burning desire for vengeance all started a few months back in the bustling port city of Estuk. Back then, Midden was just a teenager, of mixed demon and human heritage, with dreams of becoming the 7th demon general. But that was before tragedy struck. He was making a living as a cargo handler at the docks when out of nowhere, fire started raining from the sky, incinerating everything in sight. Meaden glanced up and saw a dragon, which little did he know was actually Kim in disguise. The sight of the massive beast sent everyone into a panic. People scrambled to grab their things and run for their lives, and Meaden was right there with them. He bolted towards some buildings, but before he could make it, the colossal dragon slammed right into them, reducing them to rubble in an instant. Meaden saw the whole thing. He even spotted a small human arm poking out from the debris right next to a shattered lollipop. There was no mistaking it, that was his little sister. Blinded by rage, he snatched a sword from a nearby crate and charged headfirst at the dragon. Meaden launched himself into the air with a furious cry and drove the sword straight into the dragon's skull. Unfortunately, the blade didn't even scratch it. In fact, it shattered into 1,000,000 pieces, sending Meaden tumbling back to the ground. The dragon casually stuck out its tongue and then unleashed a massive torrent of fire right at him. Meaden was completely engulfed in the inferno. His body was horrifically burned, leaving only his head and a charred torso. But inside him, the rage from losing his only family was burning even hotter. It was that very rage that awakened Meaden's latent ability. An image of his co-worker from the port flashed through his mind. A man named Dong Chao. Then a brilliant light erupted from his chest, coursing through his veins and spreading across his scorched body. New arms and legs began to sprout. Using his transformation technique, he was reborn in the image of Chao. This rebirth came with a massive power-up. His muscle strength, vitality, and even his intelligence all skyrocketed, just like that Meaden's body was completely restored. However, since Chao had a weakness to fire, the transformation wasn't perfect. His body would forever be marked by permanent, ugly burn scars. Meaden stumbled over to the pile of rubble and began digging through the shattered walls. He fell to his knees. Tears streaming down his cheeks, he slammed his fist into the ground in pure agony, clutching a piece of debris tightly. All he could think of was his poor little sister silently whispering her name, Mizon. The necklace he was gripping in his hand eventually pulled him back to the present. He remembered hearing later that a prince had been seen riding that very red dragon before making his getaway. That dragon has to be working with the hero. Meaden's eyes narrowed with deadly intent. First things first, he had to kill that blasted dragon. An announcement from Miro snapped him out of his thoughts. Miro was explaining that reinforcements had been sent to the Santo Azus region and called for V. Mino to step forward. A lizard man strode onto the stage. With a spear slung over his shoulder, he confidently introduced himself. The names, V. Mino Cadente, B-rank adventurer. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Miro quickly told the crowd not to be alarmed by his appearance. He explained that V. Mino is a rare dragonkin from the lizard folk tribe. One look at him and you can probably guess why he has a name like that. Meaden stood silently in the crowd, sizing V. Mino up. The resemblance to the dragon that had destroyed his family was uncanny. They looked so much alike. Back on stage, Miro continued, "He may come from a different land, but he's an adventurer, just like the rest of you, so please make him feel welcome." The moment Miro finished his sentence, Meaden stormed the stage, drew his sword, and lunged right for V's, Mino yelling that he had to die. V. Mino was taken aback for a second, but he still managed to counter the attack, knocking Meaden out cold. When Meaden finally came to... He found himself in a bed with Miro standing over him. With his arms crossed, Miro demanded, "Meaden, what was that all about? I was in the middle of an announcement and you just went berserk. Care to explain yourself? I've been working my tail off to squash rumors about you being hard to work with. And this is how you thank me. I don't care how much you hate dragons. You're still going to lose that fight." Got it. Meaden struggled to sit up. Having said his piece, Miro turned to leave, adding, "By the way, your prize money from the last job is getting docked as punishment. And remember, we've got a major incident next week, so you better learn to get along with your new teammate." Meaden watched Miro walk out, only then noticing V. Mino standing by the door. V. Mino spoke up first. "Hey, sorry about knocking you out back there. It all happened so fast I couldn't really control my strength." With that, he walked over and offered Meaden a friendly handshake, saying, "How about we try that introduction again? I'm V. Mino Rosa Dente from Santo Azus." Meaden completely ignored the handshake. He just replied flatly, "Meaden." V. Mino awkwardly pulled his hand back to scratch his neck. "Oh, hey, back home people talk a lot about someone called Meaden Half-Shoulder. So that's you, huh?" By this point, Meaden was on his feet. He brushed past V. Mino and said, "Follow me." A spark lit up his eyes as he added, "If we're going to be a team, I need to see what you can do first." He thought to himself, "Dragonkin, every last one of them is a monster." Next thing you know, V. Mino was facing off against a massive beast. He raised his weapon high, spinning it so fast it created a huge whirlwind that kicked up a storm of dust. The monster seemed a bit confused, but decided to charge right into the vortex anyway. However, when the whirlwind finally died down, it couldn't see V. Mino anywhere. Turns out he had already zipped behind it. V. Mino sprinted up the monster's spine and launched himself into the air. He thrust his spear straight down, and a moment later, the sharp tip plunged right into the monster's eye. The creature shrieked in agony. Vermin yanked his spear free, slung it over his shoulder, planted his feet on the monster's corpse, let out a breath, and said, "First, I've got to try this the way we do things back home." He then turned to Midden, the score assessor, and asked. Midden simply said, pass, while thinking to himself, he's strong. Vermin jumped down with a laugh. Nice a marble basilisk. He licked his lips. I wonder what it tastes like. A nervous sweat broke out on Midden's brow as he asked, wait, are you actually going to eat it? Anxious. He thought, what is this goblin-looking guy planning? He's such a troublemaker. Is he even sane? Vermin simply explained, when you defeat an enemy, you eat their flesh and blood to inherit their strength. As he spoke, he swung his spear down, severing the hand of the monster he'd just defeated. He took a bite of the flesh and continued, it's a time-honored tradition for the warriors of Rutmat. A few days later, at the Adventurers Guild, Midden leaned against a wall, mulling over his observations of the kid. Vermin, Chosa Dente is a good person, he concluded. He'd noticed that Vermin was always willing to step up and handle the jobs no one else dared to. He treats everyone sincerely. There's no doubt he's a good guy, except for the fact that he looks exactly like a goblin from Svit. Oh, and there was one other thing that got on Midden's nerves. Just then, Vermin was sitting with Mo and asked him, so, there's someone in there who uses a golem, right? That's the one I meant. He then looked up, puckered his lips, and said, ooh, go I, and John. Mo burst into laughter, tears streaming down his face. Oh, man, not again. You're seriously hilarious. Midden witnessed the exchange and grimaced. Annoyed. He thought so. That's his sense of humor. Definitely not what I was expecting. Looking at Mo and Vermin, who were laughing their heads off, he just couldn't get it. What part of that is supposed to be funny anyway? These guys... At that moment, it seemed... There weren't just the three of them in the room. Another mysterious presence went completely unnoticed. This person was Kim. He stared intently at Midden, thinking, Meeden Hapai, a man who harbors an insane rage toward Zero Dragon. Then Kim recalled what Zero Dragon had told him about Meeden. Every word of it was true. Kim couldn't remember all the people he had killed, so he couldn't comprehend what that kind of resentment felt like. Even if someone who despised me was standing right beside me, I wouldn't have a clue. How ridiculous, he concluded. However, there's something different about him compared to ordinary humans. First, I need to observe him more closely. I still haven't determined if he's one of my kind or not. And just like that, Kim's presence vanished. Just then, Midden was walking past Mo and Vermin's table. Mo called out, Midden, you're here. I hear you two get along great. He said that, but in his mind he was thinking, so when am I going to get jumped? He pushed a small chest forward and continued. I'm entrusting this request to you, Vermin and Midden. The job is for late tonight. Handle it discreetly. Here is the information on the guards at the location. That night, Midden and Vermin set out on the mission. With their heads covered, they moved swiftly, jumping across rooftops and infiltrating the fortress of Lord Dam. Inside his room, the Lord was sound asleep. They shined a flashlight right in the Lord's face and called out, Lord, it's time. The Lord woke up, but before he could process what was happening, he got a swift chop to the back of the neck and passed out, managing only a mumbled, what, who's there? Midden and Vermin rolled the Lord up in a large sack, slung him over their shoulders, and silently slipped away. Upon their return, they headed to Mo's room, remarking to each other, that was almost too easy, huh? When the door opened, the first thing they heard was Mo cursing, followed by a cup flying straight at them, smashing into the wall right next to Midden, and shattering. Inside the room, Mo was livid. He roared, you worthless trash, I told you to do it quietly, and not to wake anyone up. Mo and Vermin were completely confused. Just then, Mo realized who he was yelling at. He was still fuming, but he quickly changed his tune. It's you two. My apologies. You handled everything perfectly and quietly. Vermin asked, what happened? And Mo proceeded to fill them in. As I said before, this job was a joint effort agreed upon by 11 branches nationwide. The more he spoke, the redder his face became with rage. But more than half of them didn't handle it quietly like we did. The rest, before he could finish, someone burst in to report, Guildmaster. We have a huge problem. Countess Sombrero is dead. The team from that other branch beat the Countess to death. Miramia was stunned. How could those idiots kill a noble? He clutched his head in despair, thinking if it were just a kidnapping, there would still be a chance. We could have smoothed things over through negotiations with the kidnappers. He trembled, leaning on the table for support. But murder, it's completely over. You can't exactly negotiate with a dead person. Suddenly, he saw Maiden with the Lord they'd kidnapped slung over his shoulder. An idea struck him. We must proceed with negotiations. DiMaggio watched the Baron carefully, but under no circumstances is he to be harmed. But he was still incredibly frustrated, slamming his fist on the table. Damn it all! How did everything go so wrong a few days earlier at the Giantine Royal Palace? The scene flashes back to a conversation between Prince High Panic and Kim. The prince was stating that according to the information they had received, all right then, 11 lords were assassinated during this rebellion. I'll take this opportunity to reshuffle their positions. The prince remarked, among the lords, the only one worth saving is Baron DiMaggio. He gets things done, but his weakness is that he doesn't listen. Therefore, I want to put just enough fear into him. Don't kill him. Kim understood. The prince ordered, kill all the remaining lords. That was a few days ago. Back in the present, Mo was preparing to head out with the adventurers. Medan called out from behind him, Guildmaster, why can't I go outside? Mo explained, right now the most important thing is our negotiation using Baron DiMaggio as leverage. If the Baron is taken from us, we can't begin the negotiations. He looked toward Medan and Minko, stating, "You two are the strongest we have right now. Please, protect this place." With that, he led everyone outside. Medan, staying behind, was a bit peeved. He said, "If I meet the prince, I might be able to find that guy. I have to meet the prince." Minko, standing behind him, saw Medan trembling with anger and asked, "The prince, you don't mean the prince of the Geijian kingdom, do you?" Minko rested its chin on its hand, thinking, "That's right, he's the hero from the war with the demon race, so I'd like to meet him too. But the prince won't show up for the very first negotiation. If the negotiations go well, maybe we'll get to meet him." Medan clutched the necklace he cherished, silently reassuring himself. "That's right, I can't be impatient. When we go to the kingdom for the next negotiation, I'll just wait until then." Minko witnessed that determination, and its eyes lit up. It had its own plans as well. The negotiation had ended. Medan, Minko, and a few other adventurers were sitting in a room when the door suddenly burst open. Mo walked in and shouted, "We're having a banquet tonight." The people in the room didn't understand what was happening, but a banquet was immediately thrown together. Afterwards, Medan sat right behind Mo. He overheard him say, "Unexpectedly, the royal envoy is a very reasonable person." At first, the atmosphere was awful. I thought it was all over. But during the talks, both sides agreed to each other's requests. Hearing this, Medan became a little worried. He thought, "It seems like things were resolved more smoothly than expected. If this keeps up for the next talk, I might be taken along. If so, when we negotiate with the prince, I can meet him face to face." Suddenly, someone placed a jug of ale down right next to Medan and asked why the long face, and it turned out to be Minko. It said, "A banquet like this is rare, so enjoy it. Go on, wet your whistle." Medan refused. "I'll have to pass. I can't drink alcohol." Minko explained, "I knew you'd say that, so I brought you water instead of ale." It left the jug and turned to leave, not forgetting to add, "Cheer up a bit." Medan picked up the jug and drank. He thought, "I've lived for 17 years of my life without ever knowing the taste of alcohol." After just one sip, he was horrified and used his hand to fish something out of his mouth. They were tiny little fragments. "What is this?" he wondered. Meanwhile, Lord Damaji had woken up. He recalled the night two adventurers broke in and captured him. He said angrily, "You filthy adventurers! How dare you lock up a nobleman in a place like this? If I get out of here, I'll leave my territory's army here and take your heads." Just then, a hooded figure entered the room. The lord was startled and asked, "What are you? You look like some kind of monkey." The stranger replied, "I'm here because there's something I need to tell you." The lord was a bit angry. He retorted, "Tell me something ridiculous, no matter what." "You damned adventurers, I will not forgive you." The stranger said, "Baron Xiaombro is dead." This news was unbelievable to the lord. The stranger advised, "You should be careful too, Baron. Adventurers are quite aggressive." The lord broke out in a cold sweat, terrified. He warned, "Hey, that's enough." The stranger continued, "All right, if you die, Baron, then all of us adventurers will die too. But isn't it true that even if we die, the Baron and could still live?" With that, he turned to leave, not forgetting to wish, "I hope you will value your own life." The lord trembled with anger. He said, "Is this guy insane, killing a nobleman?" He didn't notice that in the cup of water he had. Already drunk, there were tiny fragments settling at the bottom, identical to what was in the water Medan drank. The stranger was now thinking with a headache out in the hallway. It turned out to be our boy Kim. He thought, "I'm not the type of person who gets scared easily, but if it directly affects the brain, that's another story. I've also been spreading parasites in the water source over there for a while now. The preparations are complete." A few days later, the next negotiation took place. Medan and Minko stood on the high city walls observing below. Minko said, "It's already the second negotiation. Time really flies. This time, I hope everything goes smoothly." It rested its weapon on its shoulder and asked Medan, "Anyway, are you okay? Your eyes? All red. Right, you've stayed up for several nights straight to watch the Baron." Medan replied, "It's nothing, just, a piece of cake. Your scales don't seem very shiny today." Minko laughed and said, "Don't worry, I'm tired. But this is nothing compared to when my first child was born." Medan was surprised to learn that Minko had a child. Firmino explained, "That's right, root mat warriors are required to have children before they're allowed to go outside." Hearing this, Medan was reminded of his sister M. He frowned, thinking to himself, how could anyone just abandon their family to come to a place like this? Meanwhile, Firmino continued to explain, "That's just the reality for the Lyrith man Dragonkin." Suddenly, a loud shout echoed from below, startling them both. From the negotiation camp, Ma was running for his life toward the city wall, yelling in a panic, "Open the gate! Hurry! Right behind!" Him, a tall knight in full-plate armor, appeared, sword in hand, in hot pursuit. A surprised Firmino asked, "What I thought the negotiations were going really well." The knights raised their swords in unison. From the tips of their blades, a magic circle materialized, aimed directly at the city wall. Then they roared, "Fireballs!" and an absolutely massive flame shot straight toward the wall. Firmino asked in disbelief, "That guy, Did he just use force? The city wall was now engulfed in flames, with only the firepower of those few nights it should have been impossible to breach the city wall. However, it seemed the wall had been coated beforehand with some flammable substance. A moment later, a massive explosion rocked the area. The city wall collapsed, entirely swallowed by a sea of smoke and fire. An unknown amount of time passed. Midan heard someone calling his name over and over. He jolted awake and opened his eyes. It was Vermino, her spear now dripping with blood. She told him to snap out of it. Still dazed, he asked what had happened. Vermino explained that the wall had fallen and everything had descended into chaos. The adventurers had gone berserk and started attacking indiscriminately. No one said a word. It was as if they were all possessed. She had tried her best to stop them, but being just one person, she couldn't do a thing. Vermino turned away, saying, "So I'm going to go find the guildmaster. He's the only one who can get this mess under control." She didn't forget to warn Midan. "This place is dangerous. You need to get out of here, too," she told Midan, who was sitting dumbfounded among the ruins. "You once said you had something important to do right. Good luck with that, Midan." He then remembered that it had taken only a handful of soldiers to completely destroy the city wall. That was the power of his enemy. "I can feel it so clearly," he thought, "the incredible gap in power between us." His hands trembled. Before meeting this Starkfeed guy I was. In the Adventurers Guild room, Mo was cowering in a corner, clutching his head and trembling completely, lost in his confusion. This can't be real. No. Thinking about it now, something was wrong. Why was I being so reckless? Vermino burst through the door and yelled, "Guildmaster, are you okay? What happened in there?" Mo was still holding his head, blaming himself. "I knew something felt strange. I completely ruined the plan. I just wanted my people to stay out of this rebellion. But why did I go and kidnap a noble and secretly negotiate with the palace officials? Why did I agree to such a ridiculously foolish plan?" A mysterious voice echoed from behind him. "Because you deserved every bit of it." Ma flinched and spun around, demanding, "Who's there?" His face grew dark as he broke out in a cold sweat. The mysterious voice spoke again. "Because you are worthy," it continued. "Mizo Ozo Fizo. Compared to Julio Aventura, you still have a ways to go, but compared to the current masters of the Adventurers Guild, you're the only one with any foresight." Mo stammered. Who are you? Who is that I think I'm going crazy?" Vermino, however, couldn't see or hear anyone else in the room. She froze and asked, "Master..." The voice continued to torment Mo. It said, "I just need to make you submit, and the drawbranch will easily collapse. So I'm counting on you." Mo pressed, "Are you another personality inside of me?" The voice echoed once more. "No, you are another one of my personalities. Though you can't remember, I have already consumed and absorbed you." All of a sudden, Ma felt a searing pain as if a chunk of his ear was being bitten off. The voice narrated the sensation to him. He was in agony, staring at the veins bulging on his skin. Then he silently rose to his feet. Vermino asked in surprise, "Master, the guild members outside are in a complete panic." Suddenly, Mo's head morphed into that of a snake, stretching out and opening its terrifyingly wide maw. It lunged straight for Vermino. Standing before the horrifying creature, Vermino was too shocked to react. Its mouth snapped shut, but thankfully, Midan had rushed in and yanked Vermino out of the way. She was stunned. Midan yelled, "Are you trying to die? What are you doing, just standing there like an idiot?" With that, he grabbed Vermino and smashed through the wall, shattering it. As they fled the room, Vermino asked insistently, "I told you to leave, didn't I? Why on earth did you come back?" Midan replied, "We're a team. We're supposed to survive together." "Aren't we?" Hearing his words, Vermino thanked him. Her jaw dropped slightly as she asked, "I know you don't really like me, so why did you come back and save my life?" She continued, "So how about it? Why don't we try starting our own guild later?" But just at that moment, several long tentacles shot out of nowhere and impaled Vermino. She screamed in pain. It was Kim. One of his arms had transformed into tentacles to attack her. He retracted them and said, "This is an ability I picked up by combining the mimicry of a mantis with tentacles." The octopus tentacles were quite powerful even for their first use. He smirked and asked, "Midan, where do you think you're off to? Don't you have something to say?" To me, Midan was completely taken aback. He froze and demanded, "What's going on? Who are you?" The answer made his eyes widen in pure shock. "The dragon of Starkfeed," the man shouted. "The dragon of Starkfeed. It's you," Midan roared as he began to transform, one of his arms bulging with veins and muscles. With his muscles rippling, he grabbed his sword and charged straight at Kim. The orc's power flowed through his transforming arm, amplified by the coat of the legendary adventurer Julio. He was dead set on avenging his family and his people. I'll make you pay for this." But before he could even get near, Kim tentacles shot out and pierced straight through his head and neck. After that attack, Kim assumed he'd devoured the Manicore and gained 3 benefits. First off, all of his abilities were enhanced and improved across the board, syncing up perfectly with his overall power. Second, he got the ability to reproduce memories and personalities, just like when he controlled the tomb. It was the same power he had used on Elder Jill. This came from something called experience, which the Manicore had accumulated. over a very long time. He raised his hand and saw that one of his fingers had already morphed into a monstrous form. And third, the seamless ability, letting him transform parts of his body into the forms of different species in a perfectly natural way. This power came from the Manicore's own innate physical traits. He sat down and started eating Medan's flesh, wondering, because I ate my own kind, the changes in my body were maximized. If that's true, what will happen if I keep eating others like me? Out of curiosity, he'd tried eating the flesh of his own kind before, but nothing had happened. He looked at the necklace Maidan, cherished so much now lying in a pool of blood, and came to a conclusion. Midan Haefel is not my kind. He said, his transformation ability, I could only copy his unique ability at a basic level, so he can't be one of my kind. He mused, my kind, if they are my kind. And that's when he suddenly thought of Joan Hen. He pulled the letter she had left him from his pocket. After the war was over, Kim went to see Prince Hypanic. The two of them sat in a carriage traveling through a forest as the prince read. Joan Hen's letter. It said, Master, it seems something big is about to happen in the kingdom of Hergenton. Since my master is a knight of the kingdom, you will surely be drawn into this. In any case, as a holy knight of the theocracy, I absolutely cannot interfere in the internal affairs of another nation. Therefore, I must bid you farewell for now. I trust our paths are not severed for good. May the goddess watch over you. One day, you and I shall meet again. Signed, your disciple, Joan Henpit. After he finished reading, Prince Hypanic asked, What's this? It's just a normal farewell letter. He thought to himself, I was expecting some kind of dreadful news. Kim replied, The content itself is fine, but the timing is the problem. He explained, This letter was left for me before I even knew the truth about the rebellion. The prince broke into a cold sweat as it dawned on him. If that's the case, it means the theocracy has a way to transmit information in real time. Could this be... The prince clenched the letter in his fist and whispered, Retribution. He thought back to the ruling class that governed the commoners, and how those commoners had fulfilled their duties to build up the nation. The goddess stripped them of their right to rule and forced them to pay a price fitting for their sins. The prince turned to Kim and asked, You remember that, of course, right? Kim replied, We've talked about it before. Prince Hypanic went on, But we both know the goddess isn't that kind of being. It's all just how the system of this world was built. It's hard to believe it has nothing to do with the will of humanity. Kim rested his chin on his hand, thinking. In truth, Prince Hypanic understood even without Kim saying a word. The prince clenched the letter tightly and said, That's right. This isn't retribution from the goddess, but the work of the theocracy. They're the only ones with the power and technology to pull this off. At that, the prince buried his face in his hands, sweating. I finally managed to get rid of the influence of Julio Adventurer, and now I have to deal with the theocracy. Seeing his distress, Kim thought, if the theocracy really has that kind of tech, this won't be easy at all, but a war with them is unavoidable since this kid is the one who summoned me from Earth using the altar in the cathedral's basement. He then asked out loud, Think we can handle them? The prince answered, To be honest, I'm not so sure. Kim crossed his arms, a thoughtful look on his face. I mentioned it earlier, but I can reproduce the memories inside other people's minds. His eyes glinted, and all the knowledge the goddess ever possessed is now in my head. Do you realize what that means? Of course, Prince Hypanic knew exactly what it meant. Kim gave a small smile and said, Good, then don't worry. Even if you were to go back on our deal, I have no intention of breaking my end of it. A tense Prince Hypanic replied, I have no intention of betraying you either. And I haven't just been sitting on my hands. You know. The carriage rolled to a stop. They had arrived. It was a large, tall castle nestled deep in the forest. Kim prompted, So what is this place? Prince Hypanic proudly announced, Welcome to the Royal Institute of Technology, Sir Kim. As Kim and the prince stood in front of the Research Institute, the prince explained, This is where we've been analyzing the Demon King's techniques all this time. Kim pointed off to one side and asked, If that's the case, isn't this a pretty important place? It looks kind of messy over there. The prince followed Kim's gaze and saw a group of 3 men causing a scene with the knight guarding the entrance. The knight was saying, This is a secret project of the kingdom. You need His Highness the Prince's personal permission to enter or leave. The 3 men, however, weren't listening. In front of them refused to cooperate. They simply said no, and that's where the problem started. The reason they weren't allowed inside is because some new technology is under development, right? It turns out they're from the dwarf race, and one of them has a long yellow beard who bellowed, If that's the case, then technology experts like us should obviously be allowed free entry. The prince gritted his teeth in frustration. This darn hairy bunch. He then walked over to the commotion and asked, Hey, over! There aren't you, the gentleman from the Evermy Republic. The yellow-bearded dwarf immediately recognized the prince, who offered a smile, and asked in a friendly tone, What seems to be the trouble? Standing behind him, Kim thought to himself, The Evermy Republic. That's the dwarven nation. So these guys are dwarves, huh? The brain is what's most important. I already have the Dwarf King's head. Being able to access those memories in this world is incredibly convenient. The yellow-bearded dwarf greeted the prince. Well, if it isn't the human prince, it's been a while. We're having a bit of trouble understanding. This ban on entry. Surely you'll let us in, won't you? Prince High Panic kept his friendly expression, smiling faintly. The guards are simply doing what they're supposed to. Why don't we step over here and talk for a moment? The yellow-bearded dwarf readily agreed. He pressed a small button on the back of his neck, commenting, "You humans place such a high value on etiquette." Instantly, his sealed suit of armor hissed open, revealing his true body, which was true to form, quite small and stout. He glanced at his two companions and gave a shout, prompting the other two dwarves to laugh and remove their armor as well. Once all three of them were completely out of their armor, the yellow-bearded dwarf asked, "So is this better?" Watching them, Kim thought, so that's what this is about. Are those some kind of advanced robots in a world where most people get around on foot or by horse-drawn carriage? That's a seriously unique piece of technology. The prince smirked, but of course, allow me to show you all in. Then he bellowed, "Guards!" The yellow-bearded dwarf crossed his arms, looking completely satisfied. He remarked, "Just as I thought, the prince is a reasonable man." But he couldn't have been more wrong. The prince's command just now was an order for the guards to seize the three dwarves. In an instant, they were tightly bound, and the knights began to escort them away. The yellow-bearded dwarf was furious, screaming, "You deceiver prince, what is the meaning of this?" But the prince just calmly replied, "Deceiver, didn't you say you wanted to see our research facility? Well, the holding cell also happens to be one of our most serious research projects." After dealing with the dwarves, Prince High Panic led Kim inside the facility. On the way, Kim wondered what that whole scene was about. The prince explained, "For starters, they're dwarven emissaries and they are notoriously curious." The prince surmised, "It seems they came here to snoop around for information on the demon race's engine, which runs without any magic." Kim ventured to guess, "A steam engine You're absolutely right," the prince confirmed. "In their country, engines need magic stones just to get started." The prince pushed open a heavy door, saying, "Our little obstacles should be cleared out by now. Let's go." As the door swung open, the two of them stepped into a vast room where dozens of craftsmen were assembling steam engines. Kim looked on in surprise, remarking, "Wow, these are almost ready for practical use." The prince tapped his own head and said, "That's right. People with knowledge from Earth always have the upper hand. Even though I'm no expert myself, I was able to acquire this knowledge thanks to this." After saying that, the prince stomped his foot on the floor, activating a hidden mechanism. The prince then said to Kim, "But I didn't bring you all this way just to show you some engines." They were now on a small platform descending deep underground. As they went down, the prince asked Kim, "Do you have any idea how many people in this world believe in the goddess?" The answer is probably most of them, but if a war were to break out with the papal state, countless traitors would emerge from our own ranks. Just as the prince finished speaking, the platform came to a stop, and a door slid open before them. Kim was taken aback by the scene before him and asked, Is that why you created these things?" Laid out before his eyes were rows and rows of humanoid creatures. Their brains were grotesquely enlarged and fully exposed, and they were all chained securely to the floor. They showed no sign of awareness, only letting out guttural, animal-like growls as drool dripped from their mouths. The prince explained, "Not exactly. I'm not the one who created them." Prince High Panic strolled between the rows of creatures and continued, "This is a creation born from the mad inspiration of the very first king." The prince then turned to Kim and asked, "Have you ever heard of Leucochloridium paradoxum?" And of course Kim had. He knew it was a type of parasite found in snails that mind controls its host, effectively turning it into a predator. The prince continued, "I've heard that a version of that parasite capable of infecting primates exists in this world. My original plan was to take the one that preys on monkeys, improve upon it, and then implant it into human hosts." Hearing this, Kim paused for a moment. He realized this creature sounded awfully similar to the parasite he himself had eaten. It might even be the very same species. The prince went on through this brain modification technique. "I'm going to completely eliminate every last traitor. With that stroke of genius, I will secure my position of power." The prince then tapped on the exposed brain of one of the chain figures, adding, "It would be foolish not to make use of this, wouldn't it? Although there are still a few shortcomings. The vast majority are still in the research phase, but I expect all the problems will be ironed out this time around." This prince has rounded up a large number of test subjects and is also hunting down any adventurers plotting a rebellion against him. He wears a smug smile, clearly thrilled with his plan. If he can successfully alter humans, he's certain he'll become an incredibly powerful leader of the elven tribe and gaining everyone's recognition. The next day, the three dwarves were set free and the golden-bearded dwarf led the way, struggling fiercely but getting nowhere. Prince High Panic appeared before them, saying, Now, none of that. But since you are our esteemed guests, I'll make an exception and allow you to look around the outside of my research facility." Of course, the prince didn't forget to add a warning, advising them, "Don't step a single foot inside, not even by accident. Otherwise, I'll have no choice but to lock you up." The golden-bearded dwarf shot the other dwarf a look, giving him a silent signal. The moment the prince finished speaking, the dwarf lunged forward and grabbed the prince in a tight hug, crying out, "Please forgive us!" With the prince momentarily distracted, the golden-bearded dwarf made a dash for the door. "You can lock me in a cell for as long as you want, but you can't contain my curiosity," he declared. He flung the door open, and his eyes went wide with shock at the incredible sight before him. The steam engines inside made him gasp. "This is absolutely incredible." Just then, Prince High Panic appeared right behind him. "I told you so," the prince said coolly. The golden-bearded dwarf bowed his head in shame. "My sincerest apologies. I was just taking a peek." But before he knew it, the other two dwarves had been swiftly knocked unconscious by the prince. The remaining dwarf immediately prostrated himself, begging, "You can lock me up, make me do whatever you wish, but I'm begging you, please let me be a part of this research. This is what our people have been searching for all this time. Divine energy that doesn't require magic stones." The dwarf kept repeating, "Please, please," which made the prince shut his eyes in annoyance. The prince sighed. "Since you're begging so desperately, I suppose I have no choice, especially since during next week's conference. I plan to publicly reveal this technology anyway, so stop your groveling and get up." Hearing this, the dwarf shot to his feet, grabbed the prince's hand, and thanked him profusely. The prince, however, had his own agenda, thinking to himself, "In this lifetime, you'll never figure out the real mechanism I'm focused on." The prince's thoughts drifted to his army. You'll never know the true purpose underneath it all, not even when your king's head is about to roll. Meanwhile, in the demon territory, the Jidantin Kingdom's exploration team was hard at work when a member stumbled upon a lever hidden behind some rocks. Curiosity got the better of him, and he pulled it without a second thought, causing the entire area to shake violently. While everyone was still in a panic, the ground split open, forming a massive fissure. From its depths, a colossal machine began to rise. The tremor was so huge that it was even felt by the demons deep in the forest. Back at the royal palace, Kim was in a meeting with High Panic, who was presenting his grand vision to unify all the divided nations. Kim felt this was a bit much, pointing out that it would be far from simple. High Panic brushed off his concerns. Currently, 5 major races, orcs, elves, beastmen, lizardmen, and humans, are coexisting on the Elmore continent, High Panic explained. Initially, all 5 races allied with the humans against the demons. But after the Demon King was defeated, they all turned on each other. As their factions grew, so did the competition. The real problem is, we need to unite the races, but humanity itself is fractured into countless nations. High Panic looked Kim straight in the eye. To achieve true unification, he declared, we'll have to make sure the current leaders will kick the bucket. While the various factions have grown, none are strong enough to risk a full-scale war. High Panic continued, pointing at a map. First we conquer the demon lands, then we unite the human nations under a single banner, taking down their leaders one by one. High Panic was brimming with absolute confidence. He assured Kim, "This world is already mine. My calculations are flawless unless, of course, a weapon of mass destruction suddenly appears." Kim admitted the plan had its merits, but still felt a sense of unease. When High Panic asked why, Kim didn't hesitate to share his thoughts. "It's just that usually when a villain confidently lays out their supposedly perfect plan, something completely unexpected pops up to derail everything, causing it all to fail spectacularly." High Panic just scoffed at the notion. "That sort of thing only happens in stories," he said, suppressing a laugh. "Anyone with half a brain can see this plan is destined for success." He confidently told Kim, "The goddess blessed me with knowledge of the future. My plan is absolutely flawless. I've calculated every single step, so there's really no need to worry." Right on cue, his subordinate burst in with an urgent report. The team in the demon territory had discovered ancient ruins. They were in pristine condition with a terror-level danger rating. This is a disaster of historic proportions. High Panic, who had been overflowing with confidence just moments before, was now utterly stunned. In stark contrast, Kim remained perfectly calm. So a perfectly preserved ruin from the great civilization has surfaced. High Panic was sweating bullets as he tried to compose himself. He ordered more royal guards to be sent to secure the ruins, to make absolutely sure no one got inside. Hearing this, Kim quietly reflected on the prince's authoritarian nature. The subordinate who delivered the report then added with alarm, "That might be difficult, Your Highness, because demon remnants have already been spotted near the ruins." High Panic tried to downplay the threat. "Those demons are nothing we can't handle. Remnants. Besides, they lack the knowledge to operate these ruins." But things weren't as simple as High Panic hoped, because the royal assassin reported that the leader of the remnants was an archaeologist and the ruins had already been activated. A massive swarm of demons burst forth, their numbers many times greater than the initial horde. High Panic naturally began to freak out upon hearing the news from the royal assassin. Kim, on the other hand, listened calmly, even letting out a small scoff at the so-called guarantee from High Panic. This, of course, made High Panic completely lose his composure. He smashed his teacup on the floor before reluctantly asking Kim for help. Hearing this, Kim could only sigh, struck completely speechless. High Panic was sweating bullets. From his perspective, Kim could handle this problem as easily as flipping a switch. Kim just looked at how awkward High Panic was, not knowing what to say. He briefly wondered if he should just eat the guy. High Panic clenched his trembling fist, thinking of the goddess, but it seemed she was no help this time around. He blamed the goddess for not giving him a heads up about the hidden dangers. The knowledge the goddess provided High Panic was strictly for the future. Consequently, any information not needed for the future simply ceased to exist for him. These ancient ruins were something entirely unnecessary. If High Panic hadn't overexploited the demon tribe's territory in the first place, the ruins never would have appeared. This was completely his own fault. He had well and truly dug his own grave. At the Demon King's city where the ancient ruins had surfaced, countless demons emerged, arrogantly chasing the humans off their territory. The soldiers were terrified, unable to process how so many demons could appear so suddenly. Right after that cry of panic, a demon leaped high into the air, dagger in hand, with every intention of sending the soldier to meet his maker. Meanwhile, somewhere else, rows of demons were placed inside containers. Another demon looked at them and was completely amazed that they could clone so many other demons in such a short period of time. He admired and praised this. The pinnacle of an achievement by Beidan. This was the leader of Sitak Fit's vanguard. Beidan was quite pleased. This was an ancient weapon passed down from the Demon King. Its name was the Giant Cloning Machine. With this little toy, they would never have to worry about a shortage of soldiers again. Beidan smiled slyly. The blades of Sitak Fit were preparing for the demon tribe's second great war. At that very moment, another demon interrupted Beidan's premature celebration. Beidan assumed another ruin had appeared, but that wasn't it. This demon's body was missing several parts, and he brought grave news for his master regarding the Sitak Fit's dragon incident. Outside, the demons were fighting with gusto. Suddenly, a dark purple smoke filled the air. Kim appeared in the form of a giant dragon with 2 snake heads for hands, breathing fire and spewing poison everywhere, successfully driving the demons into a corner. Just then, a loud explosion erupted. An object covered entirely in iron landed right next to Kim. He wondered if this was some kind of warship. Kim promptly reverted to his human form. Immediately after, the royal assassin appeared and handed him a communicator for a direct line to High Panic. After Kim took the device, the royal assassin quickly departed. He even ran smack into the warship beside him. On his way out, Kim ran into 3 demons, Beidan among them. A demon next to Beidan reported to him that Kim was the one who had transformed into a dragon and wiped out their soldiers. He called Kim the Dragon of Sitak Fit. Hearing this, Beidan flew into an absolute rage. He wanted to question Kim, but was suddenly ensnared by his own tail and left dangling in the air. The other 2 demons were completely flabbergasted. Kim felt pretty lucky to have run into them so soon. He quickly transformed. Not long after, the 2 demon subordinates were promptly sent packing by Kim. As for Beidan, he received the distinct honor of being devoured by Kim. Kim then relived Beidan's memories, and thanks to that, he headed off in the right direction and successfully reached the laboratory. Kim saw rows upon rows of demons contained within large tubes. He realized that this was cloning technology, that this kind of tech definitely did not belong to this world. Kim checked the next room using his bare hands to easily pry open the sturdy door. The inside was filled with modern machinery. He felt that compared to ancient ruins, this looked a lot more like technology from Earth. Kim noticed a small screen nearby. The text on it was in English. He tried to input some information, but it was no use. Suddenly, this all felt very similar to his time on Earth. Back in the day, he was very experienced at handling things like this. He never imagined it would show up here. Just 4 hours later, Kim had successfully infiltrated the system. It turned out the owner of this machine was a Senator Du Philip. Kim broke out in a cold sweat. He finally managed to log in feeling very lucky. Even though Kim was temporarily using the mind of a highly skilled hacker, he still faced some difficulties because this hacker was from Earth, and this system was something that would only appear on Earth in another 50 years. This was a warship using technology from the year 2072. Kim mused to himself as he explored the machine. It seemed that even the Earth of 50 years from now would struggle to compare with this thing. In any case, it wasn't part of the necessary knowledge for High Panic's future. Even if he returned to Earth, this technology would be useless. So Kim decided to destroy it. After just a few commands, Kim successfully activated the self-destruct mode. It was set to go off in 15 minutes. It even announced an emergency evacuation, but an annoying beeping sound wouldn't stop. Naturally, Kim wanted to fix it quickly, and the fastest, most effective method back in Korea is to just give something a good whack. Kim slammed his hand on the machine, but what he expected didn't happen. A red light quickly flashed a critical signal. It warned that a level 1 alien cell reaction had been detected. All current operations would be interrupted. The previously set commands were canceled. Control of the warship would now be transferred to the artificial intelligence. It even wished Kim good luck. Right after this announcement, before Kim could even process his confusion, the entire area exploded violently. This explosion shook. A massive explosion suddenly tore through the area, illuminating the whole sky. Kim found himself sprawled on the ground, wearing nothing but his pants. Wincing in pain, he pushed himself up, only to find himself surrounded by nothing but dirt and rocks. This gave Kim pause for a moment. He figured the self-destruct sequence must have failed. An explosion of this size couldn't possibly have taken out the whole warship. Just then, he spotted a trail off in the distance. At that exact moment, a call came in from H. Panic, who was on the other end, sounding very hopeful. He was really counting on Kim to confirm that the relic was completely destroyed, but all he got was silence, which started to make him nervous. In fact, he was getting extremely anxious. After a moment, Kim finally spoke up, telling him he had some bad news and some worse news, and asked which one H. Panic wanted to hear first. Feeling dizzy and utterly devastated, H. Panic reluctantly chose the bad news. Kim didn't